and ask you all to stand. And I'm going to ask Kristen McCarthy-Vahey to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. If I might, a couple of just quick administrative points. One, we are in the midst of celebrating our 375th anniversary. We've got a food drive coming up at the end of April. That'll be April 26th and 27th. And we have, we're looking to make that the world's biggest food drive, so we want everybody from every organization, every school, every group, every sports team in town helping out with that. We are going to have Dan Caruso, who's chair of that event, at our next Board of Selectmen meeting to give us more details on what's taking place there. We have a shop and stroll on April 3rd. That's our spring shopping event that'll be held throughout the downtowns in, actually our downtown as well as Southport, Grassmere, as we did over the holidays. There'll be lots of merchants providing both food and drink for our evening shoppers that day. Again, that's April 3rd. There'll be more details on that coming up. And then lastly, in honor of our 375th, I do want to point out that my tie, which was bought in downtown Fairfield at one of the venues in the Brick Walk, actually, when you look closely, has all the streets in Fairfield listed on it as part of the pattern. I think that's something that everybody should have on our 375th anniversary.
I'll have to go get it.
All right. If you're looking at the recognition, we have a couple of agenda. We have a couple of changes to make. One is recognition. Our Fairfield Ward High School student could not make it today, so we're going to postpone that to a Board of Selectmen meeting in the future. Next up, we have the minutes to consider and act upon. The minutes of regular meeting March 5th, 2014. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
I'll second. Any changes? Any discussion on the minutes?
No.
Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes passed as presented. All right, next up, we have some representatives from UI, United Illuminating, here to talk about their vegetation management plan. As pretty much everybody's aware, during both Irene and Sandy, we had a lot of power lines that were down. Those power lines, in many cases, were knocked down by falling branches or falling trees. The state has passed some new legislation to provide for UI to help protect the power lines as they stand. So we're getting an update on this. I met with these gentlemen last Friday. They gave me an update, and we wanted to make sure that we got the word out to everybody. This program they're talking about will start June 1st, and there is a technical session in front of Pura on March 27th, would be the other key date that's scheduled at the moment. But with that as an intro, let me turn the mic over to our friends, and if you could state your name and position.
Do we have a copy over there?
We do, because it was in the backup to our handout.
Everybody in the audience? Copy, I have some extras.
We're going to walk through a printed presentation. That want to follow along.
Jim Cole, of Operations and Maintenance at UI. Also have some individuals here from UI who can help answer questions from our other groups. I have Ken Bullard, he's our monitor, and I have Dave Goodson, he is our manager of management. Your attention to the presentation, and we'll start with quickly go over the contents of the presentation, and I'll walk everybody through this quickly. I'm going to talk about the process outlined in the state law. I'll start with that and talk about the rights of private homeowners and the towns and the tree wardens, et cetera. I'll walk you through that. And I'll talk about expectations of stakeholders as it relates to continuous power during extreme weather events, such as tropical storms with hurricane-force winds, ice storms, and October snowstorms like we have seen over the past few years. We'll talk about what is the risks to the electric system due to extreme weather. What can we expect if more of these storms come rolling through? What kind of damage and outages and the risk to the public safety and the loss of electric power that will occur. Talk about what is the utility protection zone, and that's sort of the framework around our new program to help to secure the electric system, make it more storm resilient during these extreme weather events. Talk about how the new vegetation program actually addresses the risk, and we'll talk about the program, sort of the time frame, and how we're going about prioritizing the different areas and circuits that we work on and how long it's going to take us to work through this. And then lastly, I'll mention we had a pilot that we're working on right now, started January 1st. It's a very limited amount of work we're doing in 4 of our towns, and that was put in place to sort of learn, to understand how to do this right and make sure we work through the new process of the law. And there's been some learnings out of that already that we have incorporated into our plan. Like the first selectman had mentioned, there is a technical session next week to discuss any final modifications or changes that may come out as part of these recommendations we're going to put out there. So if I turn your attention to slide 3, what I'm showing here is sort of a table with 2 parts. There's a left side and a right side. And out of Public Act 13-298, which was a law that was put in place last year, that many groups, including UI, CLMP, and many other groups worked on, including DEEP, over an 8-month period to get the language right to ensure that the property owners' rights are protected and the town's rights are protected, because they are the owners of the trees. UI doesn't own any trees, so any work we do has to be done with the consent, in some cases, for private trees. If the tree's on private property, UI needs explicit consent to do anything to the trees. If we don't get consent, then we have to move on from there. If it's a town tree, then typically it's under the care and control of the tree warden, who has the approval or disapproval on our work. We also have in the law, UI and a property owner have the right to appeal a decision of a tree warden to PURA, the regulator, who could make a final decision on that or hold a hearing and try to work out a resolution to where we're having differences of opinion. So this table basically looks at the benefits of the trees, which are many, and they're varied and they're well known, and then you have the benefits of the reduction in damage due to outages during extreme weather events. So the benefits of the trees are listed on the left, and on the right you have the benefits of keeping the lights on. So the Public Act and the law in its many steps will help to balance these out. We have found out through our work and through the pilot that different property owners in different towns, they all have a difference of opinion on the value of each one of these items, where some parts of a town or some private homeowner weights things more heavily on aesthetics or energy savings and property value as compared to the value of having the lights on during right after these major events. So this Public Act allows that to happen sort of at the level, the appropriate level, either the person who owns the tree or at the town level who has care and control. So UI is dedicated to that process, and we follow that process, and we're bound by that process in the state law. If you go over to slide 4, this is a very high-level process diagram I put together. This is the many steps in that process in the state law. If you read the language, we just took the language and we transposed it onto this little process map here. So this is really about mostly about town trees. This is not about private trees. The private tree process is very, very simple. If it's a private tree and the private homeowner says no, then there's no recourse because that's their private property. We can't take somebody's shed, we can't take their car, etc. That's their property. So we have no rights there, and UI will move on. If it's a town tree, then it goes through a few other steps. First of all, we want to make sure that the people who are on the street or abutting the tree, the areas that could be affected by the tree pruning or removal, they have to be notified. So UI will notify either through mail or door to door by knocking on the door of the abutting property owners about the work that's going to occur. We have to do that within 15 days before the work. UI's goal is to do that at least 3 months in advance, and that's what we're shooting for right now, because we like to give customers as much time to know what's going on before we move in. Now, if one of the property owners who we notify objects within 10 days of receiving a notice, then that objection will stop the process, and it'll have to go to the tree warden to make a decision. So the property owner has to object in writing, and the packet of information we give the homeowners has consent forms in it or objection forms in it, so that helps them with the writing part. So they can take that form and say, I object to this, and give it to the tree warden. We put information on there about who their tree warden is and who they can call, etc., to make it as easy as possible. So the tree warden then has to make a decision within 10 days about the trees. There's other laws in place as far as the tree warden goes. If there's any town tree that's going to be removed, or in some cases pruned, there's called the posting law. So the tree wardens are supposed to post these trees with a visible sign so that anybody driving by can see that, and they can object. So if people from outside the area, if there's any objections, typically the tree warden will hold a public hearing and then make an ultimate decision. So there's a couple of laws in play at the same time. There's also requirements for consultation. If the customer wants a consultation with the tree warden, that has to occur so that they fully understand the work that's going on. And our work planners in the field, they will talk with each customer. They will meet with them face to face and explain the work, explain to them the need, etc. And if they give a consent, if it's a private tree, we'll get a sign off on a private tree. But for a town tree, there's a number of steps here that we go through. If the tree warden makes a final decision either way, not to prune or remove, or to prune or remove, either way, appeals can be done by the homeowners, and UI also can appeal the decision to our regulator, and then the regulator will look to mediate the final resolution. So that's an overview of the state law process. It has many steps in it, as you can see. If you look at slide 5, we're going to go back a little bit and go back a few years. This is a listing of all of the formal investigations that occurred out of the many storms we had. We had the 2010 nor'easter, we had Irene, we had Sandy, we had the October snowstorm. So this just goes and shows you that there was a lot of attention on reducing the level of outages due to these extreme weather events. And out of these investigations, which UI and CLMP and others participated in, lots of recommendations came out, and they had many common themes. But 3 that really stood out were they liked the utilities to be better prepared and the towns to be better prepared for these type of events. And that goes to improving your emergency planning and response. So when it does occur, you can respond quicker. And we've done a lot of work in that area. UI has done extensive redesign of our emergency planning and response, and we have the ability to manage a large number of crews. And in Sandy, I think that paid off. Even though Sandy was twice the damage of Irene, we still restored within 8 days. Another theme was customers want to be communicated to often and frequently. They want to know when their lights will be back on, so they can plan their lives during these storms. Should I get a hotel room, or should I just hang out? Maybe I'll be back in a day, just wait it out. Should I go with family, etc.? So there's a lot of technology projects that UI has undertaken to do that, because to give the customer level schedule of when they will be restored requires a lot of field automation, requires a lot of wireless communications, a lot of back and forth communications from the crews in the field real time, which means mobile devices and communications over cell phone systems, and updates to our website, and so customers can get information very quickly, and UI has been working on quite a bit of that. The other piece was around storm resiliency. How do you stop the outages from occurring in the first place? A number of recommendations related to putting the system underground,
Substation flood mitigation was one of them. And also, how to deal with the major cause of the outages, which is the tree conditions in the state. 90% of the outages are caused by the trees because they've grown so large and they've grown over the wires so closely. So UI did substation flood mitigation in Bridgeport, and that was successfully completed. Looked at a number of options for undergrounding. The underground option is an option that's extremely expensive. We calculated it out. It's multi-billions of dollars. You'll triple your customer bill essentially. So the range of $10 to $15 billion is basically what it would take to underground the system. And it would add probably 42 cents per kilowatt hour to your bill, total bill, which right now your total bill is 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So you're talking about tripling of a bill over 40 years. So we don't think the underground option is reasonable or practical. There's a lot of other problems with the underground. I mean, it does have its benefits. It would reduce the outages, of course, and the aesthetics benefits are there. But you have to dig up the roads. You're probably going to damage a lot of tree roots in the process. You probably have to take a lot of property to do that because it's not just a simple small trench. We have to have vaults and splice chambers we have to put in place. This is a lot of area we have to take in these crowded streets, especially in your urban areas, when it's filled with water and gas and sewer systems are already there. So that's not a reasonable option. So we looked at vegetation management. So what can we do to reduce the outages caused by the trees? So during a hurricane or a tropical storm, you get the heavy rains and the winds that will blow over the trees. So that's sort of a left to right. And then during the ice storms and the October snowstorms, that comes from above and will crash your canopy down on your trees. So our new vegetation program came out of that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and that's basically increasing the clearances. You could skip over slide 6 because that's just another representation of all the investigations. Before I get into the program, I want to step back to what will happen if we have these storms again. And on slide 7, this is a table that UI has in its emergency response plan. So this is a table we use to plan our response to these type of weather events that are predicted to occur. So if we do get a tropical storm like Irene and Sandy, we could expect 50 to 70% of our customers to lose power. That's just the amount of damage you're going to get, and it'll take us 7 to 9 days to restore. Category 1 hurricane, you're going to get more customers out. It's going to take 9 to 14 days. So the point of this table is to show that unless we make a change to the situation out there in the field, these type of outages will occur, and these long restorations will still occur unless we make these changes. I listed the major ice storm there because that's one that's a worry to us because it's typically followed by very cold weather. And that could be a real hardship if you're out for 7 to 9 days. So on slide 8, we have another table that outlines that these extreme weather events do have a regular reoccurrence pattern. If you look over 200 years of history, these storms can occur regularly. There is a pattern there, so there's a certain probability that they can occur again. The Category 1 hurricane has a calculated return period of every 17 years. The last one that occurred was approximately 28 years ago. It doesn't mean the probability changes from 1 in 17. It just means you're beyond sort of what the predictions would say to you. Same with the rest of the storms. So these storms have a regular reoccurrence. We can't rightfully say that we're never going to get extreme weather again because that's really not a correct statement. The ice storm, again, I talked about is problematic. Because it could be followed by very cold weather. And that little blurb on the bottom is a weather report for an ice storm that affected the Philadelphia area in February. And they had a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of ice, and that's all it takes, and they had 800,000 customers out of power. This weather report was 2 days before it actually hit the Philadelphia area, but this weather report was this was UI's weather report. So we were 2 days away from getting that ice storm ourselves. Luckily, the weather patterns changed, and we only got less than 0.2 inches of ice, if you remember that period. So we kind of dodged it there on that one. So on slide 9, this is, again, about the stakeholders and what are the risks to extreme weather. There's a quote there from our governor about the situation after the October snowstorm, talking about the 2 to 18 inches of snow on a full canopy will damage your trees. Regardless of how strong they are, you're going to get damage when that kind of weight is on them. And it also causes issues with road closures, which is a huge issue. UI helped open over 1,100 roads during after Tropical Storm Sandy. So that's an issue for first responders to get to people who are in need. If you look at the next slide. So it's been UI's experience, experience of other utilities, that when you get a mature tall tree, there is a risk of failure during tropical storms, hurricane-force winds, ice storms, October snowstorms, and a lot of these trees have no apparent structural issues or defects. These are just 2 examples. We have a very large database of many pictures of trees down during these storms, and these are V-notch trees that if you looked at them before they fell, you would say there's nothing really wrong with these trees. It's not apparent that there's an issue. However, the storms seem to find a way to find the defects or the structural weaknesses in these trees. Now I show a V-notch tree there on the bottom right. That's in Bridgeport. The issue with doing the V-notch is when that tree falls over, essentially has a 100% likelihood of striking the line or breaking the poles. So there's really no right-of-way there or no clearance that we have. So regardless of where that falls, it's going to take down and damage the infrastructure. And we have a lot of that situation right now in UI's territory, and our program is looking to try to alleviate some of this. And again, I reiterate that the process outlined in the state law allows discussions to occur as to the risk of an individual tree falling, the benefits of the tree, and the risk to the electric system. So as I mentioned, UI just can't go out and do what we want. We have to get consent, we have to get permissions, we have to get approvals. So, if a certain individual feels that, I prefer to have the situation stay the way it is with the tree, understanding the risk during these storms, and that's a personal decision, and it could be even a town level decision. UI would continue on with the program and leave that situation as it is, but we also have to evaluate on our side, the risk, the true risk to the electric system, and is it important enough for us to actually appeal to PURA. You got to imagine even one tree coming down can take out many thousands of customers, and customers who are not even in that town could be affected. There could be medical life support customers on there that would be at risk. There could be town municipal priority facilities that are at risk. So we would have to gauge if we want to appeal that to PURA or not. And the law allows us to do that. So I'll talk now about what exactly is the utility protection zone. The utility protection zone is a rectangular area extending horizontally for a distance of 8 feet from any outermost electrical conductor or wire installed from pole to pole, and vertically from ground to sky. This is actually out of the state law. It defines it. So a utility may perform vegetation management within that utility protection zone in order to protect the reliability of our service. So after these extreme weather events, we come to realize the expectations of the stakeholders is that it's not only just average weather we're trying to protect from now, it's extreme weather. So it's these tropical storms, hurricane-force winds, ice storms, October snowstorms. So we need to do something different in our clearance specification that we have. Historically, our tree trimming program has worked well for the average New England weather. It's allowed a window around the wires of the trees. It's allowed V-notch trees. It's allowed trees to come very close. However, it does not work very well during these extreme weather events, as we have found out. So we're looking to make a change. So securing the reliability now has gone from average weather to also some level of extreme weather now. So if you look on slide 12, this is how the program addresses the risk. So what I've drawn here is some simple pictures. If you're looking down from above at a wire. The line is a wire. You're looking on the left here, starting with the left picture. I show the trunk of a tree, and I show the outside circle is the crown of a tree. In many situations in our territory, we have this where the crown of the tree is completely engulfing the wires, or the tree is a V-notch tree. So if that tree were to fall during some of these extreme weather events, the probability of contact is about 100%, as I mentioned before. So the program is looking to move the trees and the risks away from the lines, so that now you're introducing areas where the trees can fall and not impact the lines. Until you, for example, on the third picture over from the right, when you're just adjacent to the line, your probability goes to about 50%, because that tree can fall 180 degrees away from the line. It can also fall 180 degrees towards the line, but in 360 degrees of a circle, that's a 50% chance. So the farther you move away, you start to get less than 50%. We believe our program with the 8 feet is going to give us a 25 to 50% reduction. There's ways to calculate the probability of a line strike when you go from basically 0 right away, which we have in some cases because of everything's enclosed. When you go to 8 feet, you can get a 30% reduction just because the strike probability is lower because you've moved away. And again, I got to reiterate, how much risk is acceptable varies from person to person and from municipality to municipality. UI doesn't have the rights to do this program without permission and consent. The next slide is slide 13. This is a pictorial representation out of the state's Vegetation Management Task Force report. This is the condition of the roadside forest today. You can see it shows a lot of trees very close, growing over, and you also have trees underneath. We're trying to create that clear zone that's indicated by the triangle that you can visualize. It's more of a rectangle, but the trees underneath the lines would not be touched in the program. If they're compatible trees, like dogwoods or cherry trees, etc., UI would not be looking to do anything or any kind of trimming or removal of those trees, just those that are growing above the lines and into the lines. All right. So on slide 14 is the situation we're trying to create. This says 5 years. Our program is actually over an 8-year time frame. So we're looking to create this first clearance zone over an 8-year time frame. We're looking to create that 8-foot boundary from ground to sky, leaving any understory or right tree, right place trees underneath the lines that won't impact them. And we believe this will give us a 25 to 50% reduction in storm-related outages, which can equate to a 2 to 4 day reduction in an outage like Sandy, which was 8 days. So we're looking to make an appreciable difference here. The other part of this that I don't show on here is that there's also some responsibility of homeowners and towns to make sure they plant the right tree in the right place going forward, because we wouldn't want to have the same situation occurring. Okay? And there's a number of organizations that promote that, such as the Arbor Day Foundation. If you go on their website, they have a number of trees there they show that are compatible and how they should be planted. So let's talk about the program itself and the results of our pilot thus far on slide 15. The overall program is to be implemented over an 8-year period. On average, we have 17 towns, so on average we'll be looking at about 20 miles per year per town. It varies depending on the town, because some have more road miles than others, but it's on average about 20 miles per year. It's based on the worst performing circuits and those with critical state and municipal facilities. So we gave them a higher priority. So we looked at the circuits that have the worst tree situation and historically have had the largest number of outages due to trees. And we prioritized them from top to bottom, and that's how we're working our program. The pilot, we started January 1st. It's underway in Bridgeport, Hamden, Orange, and Shelton. We picked some poor performing circuits in sort of the 4 different quadrants of our territory. If you look at our territory as a rectangle, we try to go in 4 different spots there. And so far, we have gotten high levels of consent from the private tree owners. You can see Shelton is 96%, Orange is 88%, and Hamden 91%. Of the customers we've asked to do trimming or removals, it's not always removals, there is a lot of trimming involved also. We've gotten these levels of consent. I don't have Bridgeport on here because we just recently started work planning, but we're at about 98% approval in Bridgeport. and we haven't had any contested public trees at this point in time in Shelton or Orange. Hamden, we were asked to hold off by the mayor on doing any town trees in Hamden until we get through the technical session. So there's a couple of overlapping dockets that are out there, just to explain. UI went into a rate case last year where we explained our program and our plans to our regulator, and we asked for money to do that, and they approved our plan. So we're moving forward with that plan. But there's also was a docket that was going on out of Irene that was taking a long time. It actually looked at the practices for both of the utilities in tree trimming, for tree trimming. So that's the docket that's currently open. Pura had issued a decision in that docket in November of last year that basically said, go ahead and go forward with your programs. So that was the result of that. And then as we're starting to execute, we're hearing a lot of concerns from some of the neighborhoods that may be impacted by this, and that's why we asked Pura to hold the technical sessions. So the results of that docket are still pending, but however, we do have approval to move forward our program out of our last case. So that's how that kind of played out. I put in a few pictures of the type of trees and the situations we're looking at right now. If you notice, there's that large tree leaning over to the left, leaning over the three-phase primary. That's a main circuit, and there's probably about 1,300 customers on that circuit. So this is the kind of tree we would flag for removal in the program. It's very poorly attached at the bottom, so ice or wind loading will probably pull that over and take down the wires and maybe could damage the poles. The next is some V-notch trees. These trees, if they blow over, they have a high probability of hitting the lines. These trees, it's probably hard to see, but they have some decay. They've also been hit by, I think they've been hit a few times, so they have some traffic damage. So not in the best of shape. The next slide, I think we're on 18. This is an illustration of how we're trying to reduce the risk. So you have the large tree, it's overhanging the line, it has a very large leader that goes across, and there's ways to calculate this through triangulation and using trigonometry that says the total risk of that tree hitting the line, if the tree was to fall, it has about a 78% probability of hitting the line because it's so close and because it overhangs. Just the overhang itself adds about 28% probability to that impact. So we're looking to clear that out of there and get improvements in our reliability. Okay. And the next picture is just another picture of a leaner. This is actually on the opposite side of the road. We do our work planners in the field don't look just on one side of the road. They also look for real hazard trees away from the line to take care of those. So hopefully that was clear. If you have any questions, we certainly have enough people here to answer them.
Okay, good. Thank you. Just,
Yep.
Kristen, with your permission, let me start for a couple and then, all right. Just to kind of be clear to everybody, one, the nature of the issue in Fairfield is that if you go back to Storm Sandy, we had almost 350 trees and tangled wires down. And that's one of the big issues for our town in terms of how long it took to get power restored in many neighborhoods, because the problem, as we're too well aware, is that it literally was restoring power one tree at a time. And that's one of the things that took so many days. You couple that with 270 miles of roads, 380 cul-de-sacs, it can be a real nightmare in terms of getting roads clear from a public safety standpoint so we can get police, fire, ambulances out to our residents. We were very fortunate in Sandy. There was actually a fire up on Lower Greenfield Hill that the fire engines could not get access to. So that fortunately there was nobody hurt in that incident, but we were definitely walking on thin ice going across that. But just to be clear, just a couple timing points, and gentlemen from UI were kind enough to give me a preview of this last Friday. Based on that, I do want to thank them for adjusting their schedules to be back here today to speak at the Board of Selectmen meeting but also so we can get this out on Fair TV to the other citizens in town. One, this is scheduled to happen June 1st at the moment, so that's when Fairfield would be included along with these towns. As I go through the presentation, a couple things. One, you talked about notifying abutting homeowners. Now, is that just, I assume that's just for public trees?
Yes.
If it's a tree on a private property, you're just going to notify the homeowner, or you're going to notify the
Well,
abutting
they're
homeowners
going to
also?
get, because we're going to send out mailers, right? And they will get notified. We're going to do that at circuit level, so it'll cover everybody. Everybody will get a notification about the work occurring.
All right, but for a specific tree, the fact that you're working in my neighborhood may not be as, and I'm just kind of looking at the deadlines that you set up here. I'm going to get notified about work going on in my neighborhood. That's fine. That's not a call to action. It doesn't make me, get from my kitchen table to my desk or make a phone call or send something back.
Right.
Is there going to be something on it saying, we're going to cut down this specific tree?
Yeah, and that's our work planners. They're going to go door to door, and they're going to knock on the doors and let people know.
So we've got Joe Michelangelo, as you heard in our meeting. Joe is our Director of Public Works. Joe drove down some streets, did some preliminary counting, so the number I'm about to use is not accurate in that sense. But from an order of magnitude standpoint, this could impact 20 to 25,000 trees in the town of Fairfield. So is there going to be a specific mailer going out for each of those 20,000 trees that is potentially?
We're going to do it on a circuit level. So the circuits usually cover geographic areas, right? So people affected, and we're going to do this over 8 years, right? So we're going to do pockets of the town each year, only about 20 miles on average. So, that's a couple of circuits. So we'll notify everybody on those circuits that this is occurring.
Okay, but are you going to notify me that there are some trees possibly in my neighborhood that may be taken down? Or are you going to say this tree on the corner of, how are you going to tell me exactly which trees are going down? How do I know if I'm abutting that tree or not abutting that tree?
Well, there's a couple of ways. There's the posting process, right? So the
Okay,
town
what's the
warden,
posting?
the town tree warden is supposed to post the trees, any trees they remove.
Okay, so from a public standpoint, public property standpoint, part of UI's plan is that our one tree warden is going to go out and post 20,000 trees.
This is over an 8-year time frame,
Okay.
and it all depends on the trees that you allow us to remove also.
By 8-year time frame, if I round up to 24,000, just because the math is easier, that's yeah. All right, that's a lot.
A lot of those are private trees also, so not all of those are public trees. I don't know the percentage, but, some of them will also be private trees that don't get posted. They're not under the posting process.
Can I ask you just a follow-up? You're using the $20,000 to $25,000, and that number is, or 20 to 25,000 trees. Forgive me, budget hearings this month, so I'm in the dollar mode. But that number is based on just some very rough estimates from you all at UI, or is that
That's from Joe Michelangelo going out, doing a quick survey and counting some trees, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
But we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of trees.
potentially. It all depends on the level of permissions we get. Again,
Yeah, I'm just trying to get back to the communication process. So I'm sitting at home, I get something in the mail saying, what? We are going to cut down some trees, we may cut some, how do I know which trees are getting cut down on my circuit? And a circuit might be a neighborhood, 8, 10, 12 streets, right?
Right.
May I ask another follow-up? So,
Unless you want to give him time to answer the question I just asked.
No, I think he's looking for the grand plan, sort of.
The individual.
Yes, come back to that.
The individual.
I think you're looking for maybe a larger picture of what's going on.
Actually, I'm
right?
looking for a very detailed picture of how I, as a homeowner, know what tree's coming down.
You will know the
as-
trees in your general vicinity, if you're an abutting property owner. You also know the trees that are posted on your road. Will you know about a tree, 4 miles away? I don't know how you would know that under the way the law is set up that way.
Okay, step me through, when will the trees get posted, and when will the mailing go out?
Well, the mailing is going to go out 3 months in advance, notifying that there's work going to be in your area.
Right.
So there's going to be work planners who will knock on the doors, right?
Well,
Work
except-
planners-
let's just,
Yep.
again, please, one step at a time.
Yep.
Mailing goes out. I'm notified things are going to happen in my area, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have 10 days to respond according to this law. Nobody's knocked on my door yet. Nobody's told me it's going to be a tree. When do the trees get posted? Before the mailings go out or after?
No, it'll be after the mailings. It'll be after the mailings.
Okay, so a
the
mailing, so
notification.
the mailing goes out.
Mhm.
I have 10 days to respond, and the trees aren't posted. How do I know which
Yeah,
trees are coming down?
we're not doing that off of the mailing. I mean, we're gonna knock on the doors. You know, our process is like we're doing in the pilot, we're actually knocking on the doors. So notification is we're trying to go above and beyond the law. So we're trying to send out the mailers, the notifications.
Right.
And then we're actually gonna knock on the customer's doors to let them know exactly what the work is we're gonna do. That's when the 10-day would start.
And what happens?
Well, excuse me, if you could. This is a public hearing, it's a Board of Selectmen meeting, all right? And the comments and questions at the moment are for the board, which is the two of us, and because Kevin's missing. So give us time to step through this. And what I'm trying to do is, there was a 10-day notice here. You're gonna notify abutting homeowners. So we've identified it's a town tree. You're notifying abutting homeowners. You're gonna do that 90 days in advance. The trees aren't marked. How do I know whether I'm concerned or not?
Right, maybe I confused it. Our mailing is gonna go out
Well-
3 months, but we are also gonna notify, the notify will happen face-to-face also.
You're
So
gonna-
we're doing an extra step here, is what we're trying to say. So like today, we're doing in the pilot,
Just simply,
yep,
I'm a homeowner.
yep,
You're gonna cut down some trees on my street.
right,
You send me a mailing.
yep,
How do I know which trees on my street are coming down? They're on town property,
yep.
so I'm an abutting homeowner.
Yep.
How do I know which trees?
We're gonna knock on the door. We're
Okay, so
gonna
you're
talk
gonna
to you about the
just-
trees.
You're gonna knock on the doors of every abutting
Yep,
homeowner,
yep.
okay?
Explain the work. And then there's also the posting process for the tree warden who has to post these trees.
All right,
That's a separate law.
yeah, we'll get to the posting in a minute. Just, you knock on my door, are you gonna point to the trees? How am I gonna know which
Yes.
trees?
Typically, what they'll put on there, they'll put a little orange flag, will go on the trees.
Who will do that?
Our work planners. These are the people who are contract work planners, they'll do that. They'll put the orange flag on the tree. And then they'll talk to the homeowner. They'll give the homeowner on the consent form, they'll explain the work here. This is the form, this is what we're doing. Please call me, there's a number on here. Call me directly on my cell phone, and the work planner will talk to the customer and then come out to the location and show them what's going on.
For clarity, for our sake, could we get a copy of the notification, a sample notification letter that's sent 90 days ahead of time, as
Yep.
well as the packet and the information that's left at the door, so
Yeah,
that we can actually
we have all of
see
that, yep.
specifically what that is?
Sure. Also on our website, we put it there, on our uinet.com, there's a vegetation area. There's a whole set of FAQs that are there, so it answers a lot of these questions. And then there's all examples of these door hangers and notifications and consent forms. So these are the forms they get, explains the work. They can use this to object, because it's multi-part. It doesn't show it here, but it's multi-part. And they can use that to object. And then there's the posting process that also takes into place, where the tree warden will post.
Yeah, that sounds an awful lot like an unfunded state mandate again, because I'm not sure where we get the hours in our budget to do all that posting. And this is actually the first time that we've talked about the tree warden posting this. So from a town standpoint, I don't know where we get the money, staff, and funding to do that. Has that been talked about at any of the UI meetings? Is that in your budget as part of the funding project? Do we bill you guys?
No. No, this is.
Okay.
It's
Did
a-
anybody at the state consider the financial impact on the town?
I can't answer that question.
Okay, I'll take that as a no. Not your fault, the state ought to do that stuff. Looks like we need to call our state delegation and get them, get their input on this. But I'm going to, how big is this orange tag or whatever you're going to put on the tree, and how's it attached to the tree?
It's just stapled to the tree. It's very visible.
You're stapling trees?
Short statement.
Short staples, yeah. They don't go through the bark.
So it stays on really well, because they're really short staples and they'll go through the bark?
Yeah.
As good as tag sale signs.
Yeah.
And that's an initial flag.
Yeah.
So that just means that's a tree for discussion, either trimming or removal. So the homeowner, when I call you, say, this is a tree we're talking about, that doesn't mean necessarily those trees will be affected, because it depends on the process.
And I know I've asked this before, but I'm having trouble. There's some window of time when I'm allowed to object. When does the clock start and when does it end? And how do I, as a homeowner, know when it starts and when it ends?
It's when we talk to you, we leave the information packet,
Okay.
right? So that's the window of time.
So, so the clock starts on the day that the door is knocked.
Right, that's the notification. You know, UI is, we're going to work with it. We don't want it, we're not going to take a tree unless we get some consent or information or notification, even if it goes over the 10-day period. You know, we don't want that to happen. I mean, we work really hard to make sure the customer gets it. We go back at least 3 times after the door hanger to check the information. And if we can't get a hold of the customer, then it escalates to UI. UI will use our customer information system or whatever means we can to get a hold of that customer. We don't want the situation where we do work without anybody knowing, and we're going to avoid that to every extent possible.
My concern is, what we're talking about is a public tree, so you're going to do that 3-time visit to all the abutting homeowners.
Right. And then there's the posting process also, which we just talked about.
Yeah, because my concern is that based on our tree warden, his schedule and how busy he is at the moment, finding the time to drive all around town and post that many trees can certainly be a problem. And it's going to take a lot of coordination between your folks and ours.
I mean, we'll work with the schedule, we'll work with the town, we'll work with the schedule of the tree warden. You know, the schedule is not set in stone. I mean, there could be some flexibility in there that we can work through.
And I'm just trying to get my arm. We're going to send out a notice to a whole circuit, tell them some trees may get cut down.
Yep.
They're not going to know which trees until they notice a red flag or something on them. Or,
Right.
and
So they
then-
get information packet
all right,
with the
and
work.
somebody's going to visit their house 3 times before a single tree is cut down on that circuit?
If we can't get a hold of them, obviously.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, once you make
We're
contact.
going to go 3 times, and then it gets escalated to UI, who can use their customer information records or other sources to try to get a hold of the customers.
So, and again, how do you define which customers on that circuit? Because as you pointed out, that's a pretty big circuit. How do you define which customers on that circuit have to get notified before the first tree gets cut down on that circuit?
Well, we have our records, we have our GIS information system, which ties each address to that circuit.
Okay.
So we have a mailing system that will mail it out to all of them, right? So they'll know something's going to occur.
Yep, that's okay, got that,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
fine. But how do they know which tree that they're abutting that's going to come down for them to object to which tree? I'm trying to tie the property owner, the communication that something's happening in my neighborhood. How do I tie the property owner to the tree? How do I
That'll be
know?
the work planner. The work planner knocking on the door, explaining the work, explaining the tree, pointing it out, working with them. And we're doing that today on a daily basis with many of our customers in the pilot towns.
All right. And as Kristen said, the 10-day period then really starts once you've made contact with the homeowner.
Right.
May I ask a- So if I have town trees in front of my house in the right-of-way, which I do, and that is a tree that is flagged, and it sits in the right-of-way directly in front of my house, are you just knocking on my door then, in terms of the notification?
Yeah, well, the
Or-
abutting,
Or are you gonna knock on my next-door neighbor here, my next-door neighbor here, the people across the street?
the abutting
Whose-
is
whose
defined
house?
by sort of the contiguous property, right, in front of that house. So it's right there directly in front of the home.
Okay, so in the case I'm describing, it would just be my house. It would just be my door that you would be knocking on then.
Right.
And notifying
Right.
just me.
Right. And again, there's going to be the little flags. Eventually, we put a yellow, they actually put a yellow dot eventually to say that this has been consented and approved and it's all ready to go. And then there's also the posting process that we talked about.
Okay. One of the reasons for my questions, did you all see the article in the Connecticut Post today?
Which one?
How many were there about UI tree cutting?
I read the one about the legislation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it also talked about Hamden as part of that. And it seemed that this process you just defined didn't quite work this way in Hamden.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There are a number of folks quoted in the article as being upset about trees being cut, not proper notification.
Yeah, that's
not
not
having-
true. I read that. That's actually not true.
Okay.
They all been notified and consented, and we have sign-offs. I think I don't know why that was said.
Yeah, and I don't mean to accuse you of
Yep.
anything, I read that
Right.
article this morning. It was fortuitous that you all were coming this afternoon. Can you step us through kind of what's happening in Hamden? Because it seemed like Hamden was pretty upset. And wasn't Hamden mentioned as one of the towns that you weren't doing any public cutting in because the mayor had asked you not to?
Yeah, so in Hamden, what the circuit we're working on is fairly sort of suburban rural circuit right now, so there are quite a lot of trees that are there already, and we are getting a lot of private tree owners that are consenting to this. The concern is those neighborhoods that are defined by just their trees along the street, and they have a very large canopy. One of the neighborhoods is Spring Glen neighborhood, for example, in Hamden. So they're very concerned about this project, creating a change to their characteristic of their neighborhood. Like I said, we're committed to working with them. I mean, it's the tree warden's decision on anything that occurs there. So
Well, except if you haven't started doing public trees in Hamden, then the tree warden wouldn't be involved. It would be just private property.
Yes, in the pilot, right. But, the Spring Glen neighborhood is on our schedule, but it's not scheduled until about 2020, right? So it's way out there right now because of the way it fell out on the circuit priority schedule. So we're not going to the Spring Glen neighborhood till 2020, but they're concerned about what's going on in general in the town.
Okay, so was I just misreading that there were people complaining that trees had actually gotten cut that they weren't asked about or had no knowledge of?
Yes. I mean, we've gotten consent and approval for all the trees.
Okay. With respect to, you mentioned the circuit priority.
Mhm.
Do you have a list of those priority circuits for Fairfield?
Yes.
Okay, can we get those and
Certainly.
kind of have those posted so we know?
Yeah, we have, we
Who's
also,
on?
we didn't bring them here, but I thought we.
You don't need to do them now, but I
Right.
just, it would be good to, much like we do when we're paving roads,
Right.
let our residents know ahead.
We have that graphically, is what I was trying to say, too. We have it over 8 years. We can show you each area we're going in each year.
Okay. Got a call from a resident that also is concerned that he's already had some trees cut down by UI, not part of this program, but it's currently trying to get, apparently there are more trees cut down than he gave permission to, and he's trying to get it sorted out. Ken, I'm talking about Kale?
Yeah, up on Reading and North Street. I had a request from UI to post two trees.
Do you want to, Ken, do you want to come up to the mic on this?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And what I'm trying to do is find out when, A, what are the protections against something like this happening? And second, if it happens, what's the fix as you go through this?
Yeah, I had a request from UI, Ken Placco, tree warden with the town. I had a request from UI to post two trees up on the corners of Reading and North Street for a new pole and line system that they were putting in up there. I knew the homeowner already wanted these trees removed. Since he wasn't going to object to them, I felt comfortable enough to post them, to let the public know that we're anticipating the removal of these trees. We didn't have any objections from them or anybody with regards to the removals of those two trees, but also in the request, there was a removing or pruning a number of other trees that were in another area of that property. In doing so, the pruning turned out to be removals, and the brush turned out to be trees. So,
And in hearing this, one of the questions came back, because you have ground to sky, so as you're, does this involve anything, does the program you're putting in involve anything more than cutting specific trees? Is there any kind of ground to sky clearing of shrubs or?
Well, we generally have always done brush removal. That's been part of the normal program for many, many years. And brush is generally, and Ken, what is it? What's the brush?
6 inches or less.
6 inches or less.
Unplanted, undesirable,
Unplanted,
often invasive species.
yeah, these trees are all natural native species.
But retaining the low growing.
You got it,
species.
if you could, you need to speak to the mic if you could, sir.
what was described is the removal of tall growing trees, but the low growing trees, the native mountain laurels, dogwoods, those would all be retained. We won't cut those.
Okay.
I guess the objection here was that the property owner wasn't notified of the removal of this section of property adjacent to the road, nor the town gave permission to do so.
Okay. See, I guess that's kind of one-off thing, but what's the fallback provision? What happens when a mistake is made, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know about this specific one. Maybe Ken, the arborist, could talk about that.
Yeah, this, a permit was taken out. We're still in discussion with Ken to resolve and the homeowner, or we will be. We're right in the middle of that. But we did take out a permit, or our contractor did. It wasn't part of this new program. It was something separate for replacement of poles and newer transformers under a different project. So the resolution of it still has yet to be worked out. Number one, it's going to be communication, the permit process, the details to that, definition of roadside brush, communications is moving forward as far as resolution and how to avoid it in the future.
Is there a definition of a tree or a definition of roadside brush, so folks are clear on that somewhere? Okay, you guys gonna tell me
There
where?
has to be a consensus. There is, but there has to be a like definition, right?
I think every town's a
Okay.
little different, so.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
do not agree with their removal of brush of 6 inches or less. I mean, we don't plant trees bigger than 2 inches. So we could plant a tree, and a year later, they could come back and remove a tree because...
Unplanted.
Yeah.
But that's,
But
Yeah.
how is that crew going to know whether it's planted or unplanted?
not what it says on the work order.
Okay.
And on the permit as well.
Yeah, but there isn't a permit for brush, there's just a permit for trees, is that correct?
Well, to
Trees
whatever,
and shrubs.
to whatever detail is put on the permit application. Maps, pictures, but it needs a definition. That's my opinion. This is Ken's permit that we apply for, or a contractor does.
Okay. So again, for each tree going down, you're gonna take a picture, get a map, specify it out to meet that permit requirement?
Under the new program, we had no plans on taking a picture of each tree, but it's a lot of face-to-face consultation with both homeowner and public officials, state DOT or tree warden.
Okay. Did you want to-
No, I'm good with that. I have
Okay.
a whole series, but not with that one in particular.
Okay, so we can get a list of the priority circuits. What I'm trying to do is because it's an 8-year program, kind of let folks know what's first, second, third kind of stuff is,
Yeah, the maps, I think, will help out quite a bit, because we have each year on a map.
Now, your pilots are going on in 4 towns. Is there any way for you all to post kind of the results, what's happening, what the feedback you're getting?
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
We're going to create a report on what's going on. I mean, a lot of it has been changes to the notification letter, the look and the feel, adding additional parts to it. There's been some changes in that already that are going on. And, we're capturing also the approval rates, et cetera. And so, yeah, there will be a report on that.
And again, one of the things that you emphasized in our last meeting was the whole focus of this program is to be permission-based. That nothing's going to get cut without, from a private property owner, if it's a tree on his property, that the homeowner says yes. Or from the town standpoint, that we say yes.
Right. Yes. And then there's also state roads, which comes under state jurisdiction.
Oh, how will the state roads work?
Oh, Ken, you could talk about the state road process?
And so can Mr. Placco, maybe a little bit, but because there's 2 parts to state roads. Typically, we get an annual permit, or a contractor does, from state DOT, the district landscaper, happens every year. It can be for removal of roadside brush, pruning, removals. There's another law that requires the work planners currently make a list of any state tree that's 18 inches in diameter or greater It then normally either goes directly to the first selectman or mayor or to the tree warden to pass on. And that's for the selectman or mayor to look at, to say yes or no, or go out and re-inspect it. It differs from town to town.
Okay, so if I were to say that there hasn't been a single tree cut down on a state road in the last 2.5 years, in Fairfield, would that be correct?
Greater than 18 inches?
Yeah.
Well, not by our contractor, possibly by DOT.
Okay, all right, just want to
Yeah.
confirm.
Because you haven't seen one of those notices?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But the other part too, the state has agreements with a lot of the towns. State-owned property, the state, for the most part, doesn't want a whole heck of a lot of trees on their property. They don't want to maintain it. So you have train stations, and maybe DOT, that the town may maintain. Also, all the trees right in front of Fairfield Jewelers. So it's
My
it's
question
under
is,
the DOT, but
Yep.
a lot of times it's also under the local tree warden as well.
I guess my question is more, are those state-owned roads under this program?
Yes. Anywhere there's primary wire that feeds
Okay.
multiple customers, pole to
And
pole.
then the abutting Pono, so it would be handled then, or tell me how it would be handled. Who gets notified? Who gets the right to object?
Any abutter. If we, let's say we're on a post between Sanford and Mill Plain. Just for an example, I think they've already been replanted with low growers, but just for an example, everyone there, every abutter would get a notification letter, which serves more or less as a heads up, we're gonna be here. And it also specifically says, work planners will be in your neighborhood to discuss the work. And here's the phone number to call with questions. Meanwhile, we will have secured a state permit. We will have also contacted the tree warden. By the time they contact the tree warden, they'd have an inventory written out of the trees that we would either be interested in removing or pruning, and the reasons why. And then it's a review with both, probably, I would say in that case, with that location, both the state district landscaper and the tree warden. Only because of my experience with Ken and awareness of what trees have been delegated to the town to maintain, even though they're technically state property. But I'm just aware that the tree warden has jurisdiction over those here. It differs from state road to state road.
Okay, so
Right.
who's gonna know that? Are you gonna be responsible for every state road in Fairfield? In terms of knowing which trees are still under state jurisdiction or which ones have transferred to the town? Or have they all gone to the town?
We'd find that out from both parties.
Okay.
I was only aware of that on Post Road here, Route 1, just historically, that's
Yeah,
what.
you just mentioned state roads, we have more than one, I just
Yep,
thought I'd
yep.
ask about the rest, that's all.
So you would confirm that before any work, is what you're saying? So you would
Yes.
confirm before anything was to,
Yeah, and it's the current way our work planners, contractor work planners operate. We're currently working on state roads where the same occurrence, and we've met with both mayor, first selectman, and tree warden on state roads to look at larger trees to make some determinations.
Okay, just not in Fairfield yet.
Not Fairfield yet.
Okay.
Pilot towns.
And then, as we talked on Friday, one of the questions I raised, and I was wondering if you had any further thoughts on it or had a chance to talk to anybody. You cut down a tree. How are you leaving the tree?
Well, I mean, currently, the practice has been, we leave the tree, we leave the stump.
You don't leave the tree, you leave the tree?
No, we take
No.
it away.
Okay.
We take
Thank
it
you.
away.
Thank you.
Well, there's a few things that happen here. If you're talking about the tree removal,
Yeah.
we usually work with the customer. A lot of times, the customer would say, leave the tree, cut it up, we'll cut it up into log length, something they can put in their fireplace or split. If they don't want us to leave the tree, we usually ask them if we can leave it there for like a week. And you'll find more often than not that tree will disappear on its own, and it'll be taken by somebody who's collecting the wood. If they want to remove right away, obviously we'll do it, and we'll do that. We'll clean the chips up and everything.
We
Yeah.
talked about stumps. How are you going to leave those? Are you grinding, did you decide whether you're going to grind those up? Because that was the conversation we had on Friday.
Yeah, I know, and you know, we talked about doing that on specific case-by-case basis at the location. If it's requested by the town, we have stump grinder, our contractor's outfitted with a stump grinder, and we would do that. You know, replanting if it's requested. Just the only thing, we're kind of concerned if it grows too large, right? So then, you know, a lot of our budget, we have to be careful with that. So we're working on, with our regulator, technical session to make them aware that, you know, it could be a larger percentage of replanting and stump grinding than expected. So we have to make sure they understand that it can go to this program and be done properly. Historically, we haven't had to do a lot of it, but when you get into these town areas, you may have to do more. So we're learning that there's going to be probably increased need for additional budget on stump grinding and replanting. We don't have it called out specifically. It's always been in the main budget. So if we have to do it, it comes out of the main budget, which is being used for trimming and removal. We do prefer to, when we do replanting, we do prefer to give money to an organization that will handle that, like URI in New Haven, because just sticking a tree in the ground, it's not usually the end of the story. You know, typically they'll work with the neighborhood and the communities to, you know, water that and feed that tree in its early life to make sure it grows. We do have money set aside for that, to give to those type of groups.
All right. Well, certainly would like to talk more about that, but
Yep.
in terms, just as we talked on Friday, that our public works policy in the town of Fairfield is that we grind all the stumps, so we don't
Right.
leave any stumps out there.
Right.
So you know, and again, especially with a town that is basically one of Tree City USA's, and we have been for quite a while. We're sitting here and our tree-lined streets are what we're proudest of.
Right.
To see a stump-lined street is not as exciting.
Understood.
Not quite the postcard that we want to leave.
And that's one of the learnings from our pilot, and we're going to bring it back to the regulator. But there are certain situations like wetlands and erosion control, you don't want to grind the stump. If you think about in a long stretch of wooded area, is behind a guardrail, it's in a ditch, you know, you really want to grind that stump. So it really is site-specific.
Okay, so if we put in the permit that the stump has to be ground, that's not a problem.
We should have to just talk about that. Again, that would imply every single stump, and I just gave you some situations where it wouldn't make sense to do it.
Yeah, except that we're doing a permit for every tree, right?
A permit for every tree?
Thought that's what you said earlier.
That's a permission, that's granting permission. Typically, the permits cover a large,
Typically a year.
typically a year.
Shouldn't take you that long to cut down a tree. How do we know what trees we gave you permission for? How do we get on the same page with that?
Our work planners have discussions with the tree wardens pretty much daily.
Keep using that as a plural, we only have one.
He looks like a pretty energetic guy there, isn't he?
He's also pretty big, I mean, you've just described a number of kind of what I'll call work loads on the town
Right.
that nobody's talked to us about. So we're not planning for it, we're not ready. Again, thank you for coming last Friday, because if you hadn't,
Right.
Ken might take June off, and we wouldn't be ready to start, kind of thing, so.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
So, yeah, we'll work with the schedule. I mean, you know, can't do anything without the tree warden's permission, so we necessarily have to work with the tree warden's schedule.
Yeah,
as
and
it
I'm
is.
very concerned about the communication steps. How do we document what tree we said yes to and which trees we said no to?
Right.
And what I'd heard earlier was it was permission/permit based. We'd have permits for this. When you tell me we're not going to have permits, now I'm concerned about what the documentation is. Is Ken out there walking the roads with your crews, which is not something he does on a regular basis now? Where do we find the time to do that? How do we get started? We just don't have the resources unless, you know, you're only going to have one crew and, you know, we schedule that somehow, but
Right.
it's, you know, it's still coming across like another unfunded mandate from the state. Again, not from you all. We'll have to take that up with our state delegation, but we're definitely going to need our state reps and state senator involved in kind of helping sort this out, because this is not something, we're going through the budget process, and as Kristen mentioned, we're very concerned about dollars. Ken didn't ask for any extra staff, and we certainly haven't approved any yet, so.
So I have a number of questions,
Go.
but just to follow up, the permit that you just said is for a year, usually. Is that for the circuit area then? So when you apply for the permit and go through that permitting process, as opposed to the permission for the tree that gets posted, is that permitting for a circuit area, or what kind of area is the permit for?
It's for the whole town.
Okay.
The lines of communication have been continually open between UI and the tree warden. We've operated in different modes, we've evolved. We have trimmed by circuit historically, and we are continuing to under this program. We've provided a list of streets by circuits as a heads up directly to the tree warden, made that part of the permit application. We didn't do that 10 years ago, so it's all about better communication. But this is a different program. The tree warden may have please call me before any time you're going to post a tree, or you're going to request to post a tree. You can put any stipulation in there. Adhere to ANSI A300 pruning standards, which is in there. So, but that permit is separate, and the newer law is different than the posting law, which is untouched. We've always operated under that in Fairfield.
Okay. All right. Just to kind of back up and make some general comments, I think, first of all, thank you for coming and presenting to us, and I know our other selectmen wish that he could be here today as well and couldn't make it, but you can tell that we are concerned about the safety and well-being of our residents, as you are, as well as about the trees and the character of the community. So it is a balance, as you have noted in one of your first slides. And certainly, having gone out, speaking of knocking on doors, I happened to be, after Irene, and when the power was out, out knocking on doors. It was that time of year for campaign, and heard people in the midst of being with the power out and concerned about safety, and certainly the first selectman in his office through multiple storms has heard from many, many residents who are concerned about their safety and well-being and the power outages. At the same time, we've heard from folks who, like you've described in some of the other communities, recognize that the character of their neighborhood, their real estate values, their property values are based on that canopy of trees, that inviting neighborhood, that shade, that environmental health that is there when you have healthy trees. So I just kind of want to name that. Backing way up, I know that we're here talking about vegetation management, but one of the things you mentioned were the underground wires when we talk about storm resiliency. And again, I know we're in a different phase of this conversation, but is that something that you all continue to talk about in terms of the future, or is that just, off the table at this point?
It is very, very much too expensive. I mean, if you say you take $15 billion, right, and say you want to do that over 100 years, right? And I'm not even talking about the cost of money here, which can also add to that. Mm-hmm. So you're asking now to spend $150 million each year. I mean, that's equal to our current capital budget for the whole company today. So it really is very expensive. We have the overhead system. It was put in place since 1899. It's where it is. There's additional costs to customers directly. If we underground in the street, they have to underground from their house out to the street. So they have to hire an electrician, they have to do their own trenching, they have to put their system underground, and that can cost anywhere from $1,500 to $7,000 is kind of the range that they use. And I don't think, a lot of people can't afford to do even that part. And tripling the bill, it's just very large. A lot of commissions have studied it, typically come up with the same answers. North Carolina studied it, and they said they would have to increase their staff by 5,000 people for 25 years to do the undergrounding. So it really is that big of a scale of an issue to occur.
So the answer to my question is it's off the table.
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that I noticed on slide 14, that talked about the trees that have expanded into the clear zone are either trimmed or removed/replanted. So what I heard from you in later conversation is that there is no separate budget for either stump grinding or for replanting. And replanting is done only at the request of the town or the property owner. Is that correct?
Yes, generally, that's how we handle it. And it's always been in the major budget, it's always been in there. That's just the way we've always handled it. And again, we're talking to our regulator about that. There may be more here than we can support, so what do they want us to do about that? Is it going to be additional funding or what? Or, you know, that's part of the discussion we're going to have next Wednesday.
At the technical?
At the technical session. It's one of the, we put that out there as a technical recommendation, you know, how are we going to handle this? It's not system-wide, you know, every town is different. We talk to every town. You know, truth be known, some towns don't want an extra tree, okay? Some cases, they don't want to maintain the tree. They're worried more about their sidewalk. So we've heard a number of ranges depending on what part of the territory you're in. Some of our towns are rural in nature, so it wouldn't make sense to put replantings in sort of a rural strip of a forest, so.
So it depends. Well,
It does.
I would say, based on one of the programs that our tree warden has talked to me about, both as an former RTM member and as a resident, in terms of our town actually being committed to replacing some of those trees, the proper kinds of trees, that is something that I would say that we would be interested in, and you know, especially many of those kind of tree-lined streets that are so quintessentially Fairfield. So I think I'll just add Fairfield to that list of folks who are certainly concerned about that. One of the things that I also heard you saying, and I kind of noticed in the visual, is that mature tall trees with no apparent issues are being taken down by these storms, which we saw. We definitely experienced that here in Fairfield. So if I'm looking just at slides 13 and 14, and I'm looking at the tree that is being removed, it's the tallest tree of this group. And I guess just from, again, more of a big picture value statement, I mean, it's not that we don't want mature tall trees, right? We need them. It's about the placement. So the taking down versus trimming, that's one of the things that I'm getting at with this question. When I think about the Merritt Parkway and what happened, and you know, I'm not a tree expert, but the whole look of the Merritt Parkway changed because, you know, we had a whole lot of trees that were just taken down. And I think even in the example that you two were having a conversation about before, the two Kens, our tree warden Ken and Ken from UI, it's the idea of trimming a tree versus removal of a tree. What my sense is from listening to you is that primarily this program will involve removal of trees as opposed to trimming of trees. So my question is, you know, if we have 1,000 trees here in Fairfield that are in the First Circuit, just to throw out a number, how many of those do you expect might be removed as opposed to trimmed?
It all depends on their placement. It really does. I mean, in the pilot circuits, I think it's running about 50-50. I think from the numbers I
Public
looked.
versus private.
Well, as far as trim and remove, too.
Yeah.
It's running about 50-50 right now. It all depends on the placement of that tree. I mean, there's a lot of side trimming that occurs also. As part, you know, if the tree is directly under the line and it's a V-notch tree, then that'll be one we're looking for removal. And then that'll be up to the tree warden to decide if it's worth it or not. And there's a lot of factors that would go into that. And then we have to decide, is it a critical enough issue, the circuit, customers, et cetera, like I talked about, priority circuits, medical customers, for us to appeal that to our regulator. And our regulator is actually going through its first case of an appeal. There were some trees in Essex, and they brought in a mediator. And so you got the homeowner and the CLMP being mediated to resolve the issue, to see where we go. So I think they decided to actually go out and take a look at the trees on a tree-by-tree basis to understand the risk of the trees. So,
Okay. Back to the technical session. So you mentioned that Pura had given you the approval to move forward, but that you had asked for the technical session. Was that done at your request? Did I hear that properly?
yes,
And-
we did.
And why?
It was
why
sort of a
exactly-
simultaneous thing because we didn't want Pura to rule the final ruling on that final docket, right? Again, there's 2 overlapping dockets. There was actually 3 overlapping dockets if you include CLMP. CLMP had a docket on storm resiliency. They gave them $300 million to do enhanced tree trimming, pole work, and a whole bunch. So that was approved, so we can do that. That's approved by our regulator. In our rate case, we also got approval to do enhanced tree trimming. But then there was this sort of docket that's been out there for quite a long time. I think it's been out there probably over a year and a half. And in the draft decision, it reaffirmed that we can go forward with enhanced tree trimming. That was the draft
Okay.
decision. Then, there was a lot of people who got very concerned about that, and they looked at the law and they thought that we could just run sort of roughshod and do whatever we want, which has never been the case. So a lot of customers and residents came out and opposed it and didn't want the final decision to stand as it was. So in some of our sessions there was a lot of that outcry, so we said, listen, I think Pura needs to also listen to this so they can make their final decision. Because the meetings we were having, the town meetings, were just between UI and the towns. So we wanted to make sure the regulators heard this, and that's why we had that technical session. They actually had 3 of them, technically 3 of them. They had one for CLMP, they actually had 2 for CLMP, I don't know why we didn't get 2, and we had one in Hamden for UI. And now they have another technical session they requested to sort of finalize it.
Okay. The protests, I guess it's this whole sense, and this is what I can imagine, back to what the first selectman was starting with. And I'm thinking about my street, which as an example, this is not about me, this is about the town. So many streets in our town that could be very tremendously impacted in the physical nature of what happens. And I'm thinking about just people's energy prices and all that in terms of canopy and shade and all those things. But I think what I'm hearing you say, I hear you saying over and over that this can't be done without consent, that you have to have the permission, that you're looking to make sure that you gain that, you're going out to the door, you're knocking 3 times, you're working with the tree warden. But because of the breadth of this program and the number of trees involved and the limitations that one man, is going to be able to do here, there's that opportunity for things to get lost in translation potentially. And in some senses, it feels a little bit like there's potentially such a large volume that those of us here, whether we're a homeowner or the town, may not be able to bear that load, and it feels a little bit like we're being asked to carry that heavy load. How would you respond to that? It feels a little bit like the burden is more on us than it is on you, even though I know you're saying you're going out and knocking on those doors, but how would you respond to that?
Well, so far, we haven't seen that to be the case in the pilots. We seem to be working very well, getting permissions and working through it. And 20 miles a year per town, I don't know if that's a high workload or not. I just don't know. I can't gauge that. I don't know, Ken could maybe say, we're looking at 20 miles per year over a course of 12 months. Is that a large amount or not?
Well, it's 3,000 trees a year, which is the concern. 20 miles a year is not a problem if you're not cutting any trees down. It's a problem if you're cutting trees down. It's 3,000 trees a year.
Right. Again, some of them are private, and some of them are already low-growth trees. So there's a certain percentage there that would be less than that.
Yeah, it's just the unknown. I think what Kristen's referencing is it's the unknown.
Right. And, we're going to gauge that. We don't want to go any faster than the tree wardens are capable of doing. This is new. Maybe take longer than it. Maybe it'll take longer.
So one other question, and back to my kind of the trimming versus removal. Your budget doesn't kind of specify for either. It's just essentially one main budget. There's not a budget for the stump grinding, there's not a budget for trimming, there's not a budget for removal. It's just, it's all together, and you go out and you assess and you do what seems to be the best thing in that situation. Do you come into it with a bias of removing versus trimming, or are you literally assessing each situation?
It's each tree, and again, it's based on ANSI 300, which means we don't want to trim, we'll try to trim a tree, obviously, but if we trim too much of it, then you might cause a tree to decline and die. So that's something we have to, we want to do what's right for each tree. Some of them you'll find, some of these trees, we drove around a little bit here, that there's a lot of these trees have issues. They have dead wood, they have decay, they have included bark, they have a number of issues with them already. So this, in fact, will actually look at all those issues. Right. A lot of street trees get hit. I mean, so there could be some problems out there to find.
That's it for the moment.
Okay, I think I'm looking at making a couple points, summary points, and then wrapping this up.
Yeah. And are we going to have public comment?
No, we've been on this for an hour and a half. What's that? Yeah, we can- All right, thank you. Then looking forward at kind of wrapping this up, I want to thank you for, again, coming down here on a short notice and spending this much time. A couple of things. I read also that there's some amendments to this legislation moving through the legislature at the moment up in Hartford.
Yep.
Can you give us a quick summary of what that is?
When we looked at them, we're concerned with some of them because it actually would keep a lot of the status quo for us, but we read the language as sort of disempowering the tree warden, because there's language in there that provides for the homeowner to give consent, and also as opposed to the tree warden. So we were concerned about that taking away from the tree warden's ability. And it also said that the homeowner could specify the trimming to be done. So that kind of turns the homeowner into a utility arborist specifying our clearance. So we're a little concerned about that. That's really left to us because of voltage levels and clearances and NESC standards that we need to adhere to. There is language in there about stump grinding and replanting. It would say that every tree we remove, we'd have to stump grind and replant. And it says that we can get cost recovery on that. So do we have a big issue with that? No, we don't have a big issue with that, but we think it might not be practical, like I talked about those many situations where you don't want to put a tree back or grind the stump. So to make it I don't know if the language said 1-for-1, but you got to be careful of saying 1-for-1, because it would be a waste of money in some cases to even grind stumps and replant in some situations. Do you guys remember any other? You did a review of the law.
Yeah.
Anything else that came to mind on that? Just so I don't miss anything.
Specifically, there's some language in there that it's needs to be, I'll say, reworded, because it's not clear in the way it's worded right now whether it's going to be notification or 100% consent. The word option is in there, and it's just not clear what that means. And around the one-to-one tree replacement, that could be just prohibitively expensive, because to remove, let's say there's the way it's worded right now, 1-for-1. Let's say this tree is 90% dead. It's a small tree, say 10-inch tree. It would cost our contractor maybe $150 to remove it. To then go and grind the stump, replace it, might cost 3 times what it costs to cut it down. And so, you do this for every single tree, and depending on the definition of the tree, it could be very, very expensive. Because normally when you remove a tree and grind the stump, you're not putting the tree that you're planting back in the same place, because the root system is in the way. So you have to find another place for it. So when you grind the stump, you also have to remove the shavings that are generated by the grinding, bring topsoil, seed. So I guess there's work to be done on the bill.
Gotcha.
Can I ask a follow-up? You just said notification versus consent.
Yes.
Can you go back to that?
Yeah, I think the law implies that they would have to give consent for a town, they would give the consent to a town tree, which is, it's not their
So-
property.
That's what you were referring to
Yes, that's
earlier
what I was
with your
referring to.
concern
Yeah.
with taking the tree warden out of the
Right, I don't know if that was the
equation.
intent of the language. I mean, again, the way it was written, it's a little bit messy. It has some overlapping things, and then it continues on and says there's this whole appeal process. So why are you allowing the homeowner to make a decision on a town tree and then having the appeal process too? So we want to make sure that wasn't misunderstood in there.
Thank you.
And any other parts of that you remember?
Those are the biggies.
That covers it? Yeah.
Again, I want to thank you that one of the takeaways is for any of our residents that are concerned, there's kind of two steps. One is there's the technical session on next Wednesday, March 27th?
7th, yep.
Right. How does one apply, get into that? What's the,
You show up in New Britain, and there's a sign-in sheet.
okay, where in New Britain would you show up?
What's the address? It's at Liberty Square. It's Pura's headquarters in New
Okay.
Britain.
Pura's-
I think it's Franklin.
Pure's offices?
Yes.
Okay. In
You
New
can go
Britain.
onto their website and pura.com, ctpura.com, gov, and they have a schedule in there.
Okay. All right. That's one. And then second, in terms of the legislation currently in Hartford going through our state legislature, it sounds like the next step or an additional step would be also to contact our state representatives.
Sure.
Either
Yep.
Kim Fawcett, Brenda Kupchik, or Tony Wong, or State Senator John McKinney, to give them some feedback in terms of any modifications, to learn more about the modifications and to get that in
Sure.
place there. Okay. Anything else?
Just one other lighthearted comment. I love the fact that you noted trigonometry in your calculations, and I'm going to share that with my high school friends. See, there's your math being put to work.
Except he didn't actually use it.
He does in the calculations.
All right, thank you. And just to be clear, it's our custom when it's a report just to the Board of Selectmen that we don't have public comments after that fact. But we did want to get this all out, if you will, on the table, but also on Fair TV to our residents, and also make it clear what the next steps are in terms of what actions residents can take to do that. And certainly, if there's any specific feedback or questions, please call my office, and I'll be happy to collect those and also reinforce those out to our state delegation within that. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And again, I do want to thank you for on such short notice, making
problem.
time available in your
Yep,
schedule
no
to be here.
problem.
All right. Moving on with the agenda, next up is a report, an update on the golf cart lease program. Mr. Mayor, are you going to lead us through that?
Okay, should I wait till they depart, or?
Mr. Mayor.
All right, good afternoon. Mr. Selectmen. The agenda item is the golf course, the golf course golf cart, capital lease. There are 4 issues regarding the lease: the accounting issues, the economic and business calculation and purpose, the legal agreement, and town policy. I'm going to address each of these issues briefly. Mr. Lombardo is present to address in detail the business aspects of the lease, and Attorney Lester is here if there are any further questions regarding the policy or the legal issues surrounding the lease. The town has been leasing golf carts since 1996. At that time, the concept was reviewed by the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and was approved. The decision was made that the town would be better off and better served financially by leasing and managing a golf cart business versus buying golf course outright or outsourcing the business. The lease is a capital lease in accounting terms only, i.e. it satisfies certain accounting definitions that it's reported in our town annual report as a capital lease. It is not a capital lease in economic terms, in that there is no bargain price option, nor is ownership at the end of the lease turned over to the town. The ownership at the end of the lease reverts to the leaseor. Additionally, the payments under the lease do not exceed 90% of fair market value. The lease, written as a multi-year lease, however, is legally only annual lease obligations because of a non-appropriation clause that's in the lease. What that means is that the town may unilaterally cancel the lease just by not funding, i.e. not appropriating the funds for the future year of the lease. The lease is approved, in essence, by the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM each year as the annual lease payment goes through the budget each year. And that's kind of the basics of the lease. And now I'd like Mr. Lombardo to come up and discuss the business purposes and reasons and calculations behind the lease.
Good evening. Jerry Lombardo, Director of Parks and Recreation. As Mr. Mayor stated, we did start leasing the carts in 1996. At that time, we did bring it to the attention of the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM, because leasing was not something the town looked into doing that often. I think we were probably one of the first departments to actually lease back then. We found it beneficial to lease the carts rather than own the carts. That being said, we pay each year, and we pay 6 months only when we pay the 6 months a year only when we're making money of the use of the carts. Each year, it is in my detailed budget proposal. There's a line item under rental and storage in the detailed budget for that amount. It's ranged from $45,000, roughly $45,000 to $49,000 this 2015 proposed budget. On average, over the last 5 years, we net a profit of $200,000 a year on golf carts. We go out to bid every 4 to 5 years on the lease. A couple of years in the process, or 1 year in the process, we went to the Board of Finance in 2004, and they gave us a waiver of bid. So we stayed with our present clientele. The year prior to that, 99, we flipped the bid. We flipped the carts in the 4th year, and I did it without a bid. I didn't realize I couldn't do that at the time. Following 5-year contract, we went and asked for a waiver of bid. I was then informed that we should no longer ask for a waiver of bid, so we continued just to bid it. So we have bid it each year. It is in the budget, and it's from our use. There are courses, mainly when the golf pro, I would say, owns the carts and uses it because he can get as many miles out of the carts as possible. In our particular situation, it's better to have a lease so that the carts are maintained properly by the company, because they come in as part of the lease, they maintain it. We maintain them daily in the sense of changing, making sure the batteries are properly maintained, tire pressure, etc. But they come in periodically to check them and any problems we have with them. but we have so many rounds of golf, and they're not always used properly by the user. They think they're off-road vehicles. So every 5 years, 4 to 5 years, we flip the carts and get new carts. And at that time, that's when we also raise the rates for carts. So,
Jerry, thank you.
okay?
Questions after?
Any questions?
Yes.
Oh, all right, so we're done. Yeah, I think one of the key questions, and if not the key question, was it came up during one of the Board of Finance meetings in reviewing our annual statements in terms of how this lease is described in the annual statements, and do we need approval from the RTM, potentially Board of Finance and RTM, but Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM to sign this lease? And I think it
Right.
was based on how it was described in the financial statements for the town.
Right, generally, as I indicated earlier, that's what I went through, the aspects of what's part of a capital lease economically and accounting-wise. This lease, from an accounting perspective, is a capital lease. It showed up in our annual report. The members of the Board of Finance were reviewing the annual report. The chairman, Mr. Flynn, said, whoa, we got a capital lease here, we must have bought something. Most people, when they hear the term capital lease, it implies bargain price at the end of the lease, taking ownership at the end of the lease. It implies a purchase kind of activity through a leasing financing mechanism. This is not this is not that. The town does not have a bargain purchase price. The town does not have the right to even purchase them at the end of the lease. The leaser owns the golf course carts at the end of the lease. So that's why the question came up. The policy, and also the policy does say, and I have the policy here, I'll read it very briefly, it says, any proposal by any department of town to purchase or lease equipment in excess of $50,000 in its totality, and which proposal provides the repayment of funds in any succeeding fiscal year or years, must be authorized in its entirety by the Board of Finance and representative town meeting prior to any expenditures or funds. That's why I pointed out, this is actually, it is a lease. The lease is written as a multi-year lease, but it is legally a single-year lease because of the non-appropriation clause. That's the first part. So the town is never actually legally obligated for more than a one-year period. And because that non-appropriation clause, and again, like I said earlier, the town can in essence cancel, not in essence, but in actuality, can cancel the lease just by not funding the lease. And the funding process happens every year through the budget process at the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM meetings.
Okay. All right, so
But-
basically, we don't ever take ownership,
Correct.
and it's kind of a multi-year lease with an annual out clause if the
Correct.
money's ever not funded.
But technically, there is a 5-year repayment plan in, the 5-year payment plan, not repayment plan, 5-year, because we're not actually borrowing money. There's a 5-year payment plan in the contract. So technically, you could say that it follows under our leasing policy, but even if it does, it is satisfied because it's voted on each year before an expenditure is made.
Why did the auditor categorize it as a capital lease?
There are 4 primary calculations. One is ownership transfer, that does not happen. One is bargain price option, that does not happen. One is fair value, that does not happen. The lease is for a 5-year period. 5-year period is considered more than 75% of the economic life of the asset. So it satisfies that one specific definition.
What's the economic life of a golf cart?
The useful economic life, without having to spend a lot of money repairing that kind of thing, is like 7, 8 years.
Okay, so if we'd done
6 to 8 years.
So if we'd done a 4-year lease, we'd be under that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But they calculate the money, the dollars, the appreciation. It's
All right.
yeah. But, So you could make a very weak argument that it should be, that the lease agreement could be, should be, and I obviously have no problem, as I'm sure you don't. If people want to see it before it gets approved, there's no reason not to, I guess.
Go ahead.
It's a 5-year lease, but it's a 1-year lease, right?
It's
I mean, you
written
just-
as a
but you
5-year
just said-
lease, but it's only, the town is only obligated for a year at a time,
Right, based on funding, which essentially...
based upon the non-appropriation clause.
The non-appropriation clause, which essentially allows the funding bodies, the 3 bodies, to opt out, essentially, right? It's not an active consent that where the bodies are, you know, as you're saying, if they ask to go through all the terms, but it's
If it
an
gets
implied, essentially implied consent through the
If
vote of
it
the
gets
budget.
removed from the budget, in other words, if it's
Right.
not, if it's voted out of the budget, at the end of the budget period, the lease is canceled.
Which, would you agree with what I'm saying, that it's an implied consent then by, through the funding?
Yeah, oh, yes, definitely, yes, thank you.
Okay.
And then I guess my other question, if I might, just goes to the approval process. And Attorney Lesser, since you're here, could you just confirm that this meets, the current process meets our standards for approval? And
As far as I'm concerned, it does. And, you know, I take a little bit different view of this lease than Mr. Mayor. This lease, I mean, a true lease obligates you for a certain period of time. So you sign a 5-year lease, 3 years down the road, you don't want to pay, hey, you're stuck. I view this as a series of 5 one-year leases, quite frankly. It's not a 5-year lease in my view, because we don't have the obligation to pay. We can get out of it at any time. So it's not like a 5-year lease, you lease an apartment building or an apartment and you're stuck. You move out after 3 years and you're obligated to pay the other 2. That's not the case here. That's why I don't think that this really fits the same category. And I think that because of the way our budget process works, it's my understanding we can't even obligate the town for more than this year. We don't even have the right to do that. That's what I've been given to understand. But, so I think that given the circumstances, given the fact that this concept of leasing rather than buying was approved at one time by the appropriate boards, and we've continued that down the road, I think that we do not need to go to these bodies again. As a matter of fact, they do review it, as Mr. Mayor said. They review it every year anyway. So I would do it that way. And just so you'll know, I did check with one of our prior assistant town attorneys who informed me that not only did she feel they viewed it that way, but the prior town attorney also viewed it that way. So that's the way we've done it. I think we're fine with that. Again, because we're not obligated. Questions?
All right, thank you. Any follow? No, I think that clarifies what the question, at least as far as I saw it, and want to thank you, all 3 of you, for your update on our golf cart lease program.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have an update from the Fair TV Operational Committee. Mr. Kennelly, thank you for joining us today.
You're quite welcome. Give you this. This just helped to guide our discussion.
Thank you.
Actually, if you-
You're welcome. Try to
Do you
keep us.
have an extra for Kevin?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I have extras for the public as well.
we can take one here. Sheila, if you just get that up to Jen,
No, no,
so
I'm-
you can have one, but just get one up to
No,
Jen.
I'll
so we
take it
can-
right here.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
There you go. If anyone is interested. I also just thought, since you probably, I mean, you have copies of this in the past, but for First Selectman Kylie, for the First Selectman, and for the Select Woman McCarthy Vahey, and for the clerk, this is just the underlying language of the ordinance that the committee's discussed. Jim Kennelly, Chairman, Fair TV Commission. Thank you very much, members, for hearing this report. What I'd like to do in brief is to just actually begin with the last 5 or 6 slides that are here in this presentation. This is stuff that has been briefly gone over in pieces with you in either office conversations or here at this podium in the past, but with the newspaper gone and all, it seems wise maybe for some of our Fair TV viewers, they may want to understand a little bit about Fair TV, the context, hopefully no more than 5 minutes to kind of go through this. And then we'll get to the stuff that's more about what's happening now, if that's okay. So I appreciate your indulgence, if that's all right.
Please,
So
go
it
ahead.
begins on page 15, so you can sort of see what it begins with the pages that are background. Cable television grew in this country by being allowed to operate as a benign monopoly under federal law. And it was clear by 1980 that multiple providers in the same municipality or local regional service area would make it difficult for providers to build a stable customer base large enough to justify the massive initial capital outlay to wire communities for cable service delivery. Additionally, coaxial cable technology of the time was heavy. It required long service calls. You probably all remember waiting for the cable guy, still perhaps today. It was wire dependent within the home itself. Switching from one company to another, at least at the dawn of the cable age in the 1980s, would be a laborious process. So the federal government allowed cable providers to compete for monopoly contracts at the municipal and regional level, with the winners enjoying a complete monopoly for the service in exchange for certain concessions by providers. These concessions included cable systems providing 3 kinds of access to their broadcast delivery system. You can see on slide 16, this is a brief descriptor of, and by the way, we're going to post this on the Fair TV website, this presentation. So it's be another way for folks to follow, to look into this and take a look. We'll also post it with, I'll be presenting this at our Fair TV meeting right after this meeting, and we'll post that with our minutes as well. And again, I appreciate your indulgence, but just for someone who comes to this the first time and wants to listen to this little piece online to understand the issue, it's much appreciated. Public access, one of the first of the 3 kinds of channels that the federal regulatory authorities wanted cable providers to provide in exchange for their monopoly, was the precursor of today's YouTube, known as Broadcast Yourself, a channel that would allow members of the public to submit for broadcast any original programming that they created, as long as it was not considered commercial in nature or in violation of public standards of decency. Since video production equipment was still studio-bound, cable providers were also required to offer training to interested members of the public on camera and editing equipment to allow them to produce public access channel programming. The cable provider was not to interfere in any way with the editorial content of such programming or edit the final product in any way. Providers were also barred from creating programming on the public access channel. It was strictly meant for the public's use, YouTube in the age of the 8-track tape. Education access was a second kind of access, a channel dedicated to the broadcast coverage of the local public school system. As originally envisioned, education access channels were to give residents access via broadcast coverage delivered by providers or of the deliberations of their local Board of Education, public schools, or related events. Programming was to be provided by the local cable system, taping of meetings and events, with staff hired by providers. Education access was also tasked with involving the local school system, especially students and teachers, in the creation of programming. And then finally, the third type of access channel that was required of these new monopolies, a channel that would be the government access channel, a channel that would be dedicated to the broadcast coverage of local government. As originally envisioned, the government access channel would provide residents access to the operations of their local government, meetings and events taped and broadcast by the cable provider. Now, while the federal government insisted on the provision of these channels by monopoly cable providers and other concessions such as wiring schools for distance learning and other kinds of early attempts at video connectivity in the analog age, they did not place the cost of operating the channels directly on the providers. Instead, they allowed the providers to charge subscribers a small monthly PEG, Public Education and Government, PEG, access fee. Bandwidth, that is 3 channels, was the price of the monopoly, and the collection of the fee from their subscribers. Providers and regulators routinely kept the PEG fee very low, usually less than 50 cents per month per subscriber, to address customer complaints regarding service cost and to limit how much, frankly, that PEG fees could really provide. The stations sometimes were run well, but they often became video ghettos with little quality programming and only a handful of residents and government officials taking advantage of this access. The federal government left the states to choose how cable monopolies would compete within their borders. In Connecticut, rather than let providers go town to town seeking monopoly contracts, cable service delivery was provided through regions created by the state, which group municipalities together. Fairfield today remains part of the Cable Area 2. Cable Area 2 along with Bridgeport, Stratford, Milford, Orange, and Woodbridge. Initially, Cablevision of Southern Connecticut provided PEG channels administration for customers in this Area 2. But after years of protest from members of the Area 2 Cable Advisory Council, that Cablevision did little to live up to its obligations to provide appropriate service, the DPUC, the predecessor to today's PURA, chose to assign the administration of PEG channels in Area 2 to Soundview Community Media, a new formed nonprofit based in Bridgeport. This is back in the 1990s, supported by many of those same activists unhappy with Cablevision. DPUC required Cablevision to continue to collect the approximately $700,000 today in annual subscriber fees from customers in Area 2, but to pay it to Soundview to administer PEG for the region. Soundview addressed the public access element of its duties with good-sized studio space, a training program for the public interested in producing programming. However, it did little to live up to the education and government access program responsibilities as I described. Now, instead, Soundview insisted that the same rules that governed the public channel, that is, that they would be barred, that barred cable companies from, or these providers of these channels from producing or editing programs submitted to it by the public, also applied to the education and government access channels. If the public wished to provide taped meetings or conduct government-related events and programming in the studio, they could do so. But Soundview insisted that to the public and the DPUC, that it was under no obligation to cover education meetings, events, or other town government meetings. And this allowed Soundview to sidestep the hiring of staff to cover those meetings and do the difficult work of programming a schedule that would fairly present education and government meetings on the education and government access channels. Eventually, Soundview offered a little more on the education and government channels than a rebroadcast of the Annenberg Communications Project programming on the education, the E channel, and the Pentagon channel, pulled free of charge from their satellite feeds. From time to time, savvy political operatives would avail themselves of the training program for public access and produce some programming that was usually designed to promote an elected official or some issue. But even these programs were few and far between. I, in fact, took the training back in 2005 and produced programs for Representative Tom Drew, and then later produced programs for Fairfielders Plan under that program. Eventually, with the DPUC continuing to turn a blind eye to Soundview's failure to live up to its duties on the education and government channels in Area 2, the legislature and Governor Jody Rell stepped in. The result was legislation that created Fair TV Education and Fair TV Government in July of 2008. Today, the Fair TV broadcast system, Fair TV Education, Fair TV Government, Fair TV On Demand, serves as the C-SPAN of Fairfield, delivering gavel-to-gavel, live and taped broadcast of major town bodies of Fairfield on Cablevision, ATT Uverse, and on the internet at Fair TV On Demand, which you can find at fairtv.pegcentral.com. To give someone a sense of the scope of what Fair TV is, we have three, at the most, occasionally an assistant, but usually just three videographers. A primary videographer who is tasked with other system administration duties and is known to committee members and titled by committee members as the system manager. You all know him as Jerry Spino, both an activist and also a terrific technician, and some younger folks, college-age folks, who do videography primarily for events and for the Board of Education meetings. Our current budget, $49,500. Of that, we'll be presenting before the BOF tomorrow. About $46,000 of that is essentially the cost for content. Actually, yeah, I mean, of content itself, actually content coverage. That's where the money goes. It pays for those meetings you see on those channels. There's about $500 in incidentals and about $3,000 to maintain our online presence through the PEG Central seamless delivery of our taped content and to the internet. So anyway, that's some background. What I want to talk to you about, and I imagine you may have some questions, though, would begin on page 1, which is Fair TV, the road forward. And this is a look at the rationale for establishing independent oversight and clear broadcast standards for this Fair TV service through a permanent town commission. What was the rationale presented to the new committee members that this body charged back in November of 2012? We wanted to essentially, we were asked to, in addition to providing basic oversight that had been provided before, to essentially work on the rules of the road going forward for permanent, some kind of permanent Fair TV oversight. Fair TV covers local, so why do we need it? Fair TV covers local government and education. Local government votes on the funding of Fair TV. The public must have confidence that Fair TV is fair and not influenced by town officials covered. The system manager and video producers must be free of influence to do their job properly. And established broadcast standards must be maintained over time. So essentially, the goal for the committee, the operational committee, whose work really had been to build Fair TV and then oversee it as it became the service it is, was to essentially create its successor. And what did we want? We wanted to make sure that the successor entity that followed us was independent enough that the public trusted it to make sure that Fair TV remained fair. We also wanted to make sure that those folks who were tasked with that job on the commission had a set of clearly codified broadcast standards that they would be able to rely on and fall back on. So they didn't constantly have to reinvent the wheel, and there wouldn't be a debate about what essentially everyone in town, by a vote of the RTM and an ordinance, had decided could appear broadly on the channel. So let's talk about our model for independent oversight. We looked at the Town Ethics Commission. Why the Ethics Commission? Because the Ethics Commission provides oversight for town government. It must be fair and free of bias. The nominees are chosen by unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen, and they're confirmed by a majority vote of the RTM. It's a sound approach, which we decided we would copy in our ordinance language. And Fair TV has, as I said, a similar goal, that is to provide oversight fairly, independently for residents. We're a very unique entity. In some ways, this Fair TV Commission would sort of do the kinds of things that the Golf Commission would do. The difference is that there aren't really pitched battles at town meetings over, who gets the first tea time or something like that, or whether the grass is cut low enough. Maybe there are sometimes, but for the most part, no. On page 4 here, this talks about the concept of independent oversight for operations. Why would we need independent oversight for operations? Well, the system manager and the producers chosen by the vote of the Fair TV Commission was our decision because we wanted to make sure that, that these individuals, and also that expenditures for operations should be voted on by the Fair TV Commission. And the rationale for those two decisions were that this would insulate these positions from outside influence, and it would ensure that the staff for Fair TV followed the direction of an independent commission, not officials that vote on salaries and other issues of concern. Now, it was well said, I think, by Henry Waxman to the Clintons in 1992 or 93 that when they wanted to do health care, they needed a bill. So inevitably, we had to write something. What we were going to write inevitably wasn't going to be perfect, and it is part of an evolving process that we're going to be continuing to engage with the RTM, with the town law department in. But that was our baseline position. Now, we've written it as you vote for these things. And as I'll get to down the line, as a member of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, those kinds of responsibilities in terms of oversight are shared by the First Selectman's Office and a particular independent commission. We'll talk about that a little bit. So our model on page 5 for operations oversight was what I described, and that is the Plan and Zoning Commission and also some town departments in terms of how they deal with contracting with folks who do work for them. With the TPZ, they support the selection of a planning director. They authorize if funds are provided. They don't actually generate the funds, obviously, or have the power to it, but they authorize if funds are provided the use of contractors to conduct planning studies and other operational duties as needed. So, for example, when Commerce Drive was being considered for the review that we eventually did, the charrettes and all the rest, a professional was brought in and contracted to do that work, to essentially do the work of the planning department because their day-to-day operations clearly and the limited manpower made it more sensible if the money was available to do that. So we looked at that as a reasonable example. They also have the TPZ, for example, has the authority as an independent commission to vote on the scope of the duties that they choose the individual contractor to take part in. So, for example, as we were working on that, individual commissioners talked about where will the reporting be, who will the stakeholders be, all the rest, and they had that input, and it was important to keep that independent. That all said, there was a bit of discussion amongst our members over the last year and a half about what about the idea of a 501c3 model for governance of Fair TV. In that situation, we would be absolved of any potential conflicts. And let me make this clear. the members of the Fair TV Operational Committee took absolutely seriously the fact that ultimately in this town, appointed power lies with the first selectman. And there's no effort here to challenge that concept. It's absolute. There's no doubt. Now, there may be issues of consent by the board here and by other bodies, but at the end of the day, we understand that. So we definitely wanted what amounted to what we thought was a reasonable compromise position. But we did consider the possibility of the creation of a 501c3 that might have been governed by a commission. An independent 501c3 would have the authority to staff as it chose, and there are issues about how many hours workers can work and what they do and what that may mean in terms of are they actually an employee or not. And that still kind of needs to be completely vetted out. But our view is that in the long run, the creation of a 501c3 would have required us to give up some of the advantages of Fair TV remaining what amounted to a town service. We would probably have to use some of the funds that were budgeted to us for legal services, for accounting services. Currently, every single dime spent by Fair TV goes through the Department of Finance. If you were tomorrow to send an email into finance, they could show you down to the last dollar spent how Fair TV spends the dollars that come to it through the town and through the grant process regionally that supports it. Also, we do have access currently to the law department, which has been quite effective in doing such things as authorizing the initial letter of request to create Fair TV in the first place. That was handled, I believe, by the deputy attorney or assistant town attorney Eileen Kennelly at the time. A beautifully done piece that really locked in our position well and stood up under, as part of the legal fight over issues related to how appropriate it is for Fair TV to have broadcast authority on channels previously controlled by another entity. So we would like to see that somehow maintained if possible. And we think it's better because in the end, you get more content. You make dollars spent on content rather than on professional services. So that's why we're more than willing, as we work through the RTM, the LNA process, to see what can be done to make sure that there is independent oversight, but at the same time that we're in full compliance with the law in terms of what our authority would be related to other bodies. On page 6, you'll see a further discussion about the need for broadcast standards. Just as it's crucial that we have an independent commission that no one can feel doesn't take its duties, above all, seriously to protect Fair TV as a fair, independent entity focused on its primary mission, so too it's important that those folks who are doing that have clear rules of the road as to what they are enforcing. We want them to be able, we want a permanent commission to be able to ensure the mission of Fair TV, of a system that is the C-SPAN of Fairfield, using the Meetings Plus model used across the country. One of the best examples cited all the time is Sacramento, California, that uses this model. To ensure that Fair TV uses taxpayer and subscriber funds to provide service worthy of those funds. In other words, we take very seriously on the committee our obligation. And I will mention today that I am joined today by Tom Flynn, a member of the Fair TV committee, who is going to be with us tonight at our meeting, but also was willing to come down here and join me. And Mary Hogue as well is here. She's been pulled away, but she was here as well and is here in attendance. Oh, no, there. Oops, you switched chairs on me, sorry. So we were very much committed to the idea that Fair TV uses taxpayer and subscriber funds to provide service worthy of those funds. In other words, if we're going to spend $1 of taxpayer money, that money really needs to be justified. It might be something that's good, but is it truly a service that makes a difference to us as residents? And to protect the final kind of element of why we need broadcast standards, protect Fair TV's ability to carry out its mission in a cost-effective manner long term. The GATA guidebook, the Government Access Television Institute guidebook, talks about how, without a narrowly focused mission, without a mission often that precludes the creation of programming by a range of interests, and the fact that you are entitled to set your broadcast standards, you quickly can find, and stations find themselves struggling to understand how they'll use limited resources. This is essentially, people think of Fair TV, this is essentially a one-man operation in that Jerry does most of the taping with 2 loyal collegiate-age assistants, a $49,000 budget. So if we have clearly defined broadcast standards, everybody knows what's supposed to be on there, and if we want to add to that, okay, we can discuss how much more money do we want to spend to add to it. But we should start with a baseline of what it does, what it should be able to cover in an economical fashion. Now, briefly, a discussion about the proposed standards. You know, there's been a lot of back and forth about the proposed standards because we originally completed our work in June of last year. We were tasked with finishing it on June 30th, but the RTM did not meet and was unable to take up legislation at the time. This board reauthorized the Fair TV Operational Committee for an additional year. But in the course of the time since our reauthorization, there has been discussion about, the rationale for and things about the broadcast standards, so I'll talk about that a little bit. The primary schedule, which is part of the ordinance language that would be under broadcast standards. The primary schedule would be herein defined as gavel-to-gavel meetings of the following governmental bodies of the town of Fairfield: the representative town meeting, the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the Town Plan and Zoning Commission. Now, I would like to be able to cover every single public meeting possible, but this is a small, economical, the equipment we use essentially can be used by a high school student. In the future, there's no doubt that if there's an interest in expansion of meeting coverage, that's fine. But these core meetings, as discussed by our committee and as turned out to be reasonable in past practice in years prior, are the meetings that essentially handle the executive function, the financial function, the legislative function, the educational function, the land use function broadly, and that is why they were selected. There is no explanation for why there is this stirring music behind me every time I speak at the TPC. I have no idea why that happens. I don't know. The heroic camera angles also, somehow they happen. It's just luck, I guess. Anyway, the secondary schedule under our proposed standards is herein defined as additional gavel-to-gavel meetings.
What kind of music was that?
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Stirring music, heroic. Somebody here seen a Spielberg movie. Secondary schedule herein is defined as additional gavel-to-gavel meetings of other bodies as requested, town government or public schools affiliated events such as graduations, ceremonies, parades, school sports, and channel-appropriate, nonpartisan informational programming originated by the Fair TV broadcast system. Examples would be how a government entity works sessions, interview programming limited to channel subject areas, coverage of debates, lectures, or other town-sponsored cultural programming. When I came before this board a couple of years ago, Selectman Kiley, who's not with us today, raised the idea of, Jim, why not simply meetings? And frankly, that is a model that's used around the country. But after discussion with him, because I could have saved myself a lot of grief if I'd just gone with that. But after that discussion with him, and with members of our committee and with members of the public, we realized that Fair TV could meet its obligation as the C-SPAN of Fairfield by doing events that were part of a larger penumbra of the government and the education here in town, and that they were worth working out standards. And I want to be clear, the goal is try to give folks as much of a window into how things work as possible. I'm a huge believer that this meeting and each of the public meetings that you have is a wonderful opportunity to educate the public. Needless to say, I know at the end of a long day, you really just, sometimes we all would just like to go home. But I would say that in each of these bodies covered, in each of these events that are presented, we have a chance as a community to have a great beginning of a great conversation. So I very much like the idea of maintaining some kind of secondary schedule. And then that kind of brings us to what amounts to kind of the skunk in the garden, which is this last point, which is the final element of the secondary schedule's limitations. It states here that the primary schedule must be completely funded, assigned, and scheduled before any of the budgeting for or coverage of secondary programming is executed. No elected official may produce, host, or appear as a guest in secondary schedule programming. So let me try for the record, so that there's not any controversy, or at least there's less controversy, explain what we're talking about here. First, we want to make clear that the primary mission is those meetings of those key bodies, and that we have to have someone, we have to have the money, and we have to have a videographer, and the equipment, and everything ready, and those have to be taken care of. And we assume each year, as we start each year, we have that money in hand, we do it. What's left over, that's where the secondary schedule then can be planned for. it's really limited by the amount of creativity, Jerry Spino's patience, and the funds that are available to do things that can make the secondary schedule not only another way for us to highlight what's going on in town in terms of what the government and our public schools do and what is offered here, but it's also a way for the community to feel a greater kind of sense of engagement. But there is a price. There's only so much pseudo pro bono work that Jerry or the staff can do. And he's done plenty of it. I won't, you know well my thoughts about that. So that's why it's so important that the primary schedule be squared away and that then we'll get to the secondary stuff. Now, why this bright line, as it was described actually by Tom Flynn in our discussions, why this bright line about no elected official producing, hosting, appearing as a guest in secondary schedule programming? I happen to be an elected official, and as an elected official, when this permanent commission, if it is indeed approved and goes into the code, even though I adore everything I've worked on Fair TV for 6 years, I will have to remove myself or remove myself from the other body that I'm part of to be involved in Fair TV. We have to make kind of tough choices. Why this tough choice? Well, first, there's evidence across the U.S., if you just Google a bunch of these different stations, that kind of model works, that meetings plus event stations are the ones that deliver the best of what is government and education access without their committees getting bogged down in what is considered infotainment and what is information, what is partisan, what is not. I would say to you, would you prefer your Fair TV Commission worrying about how we'll do creative, exciting things for the 375th anniversary? Or would you want them to be debating endlessly and using up their energy on whose program on one subject, who's an elected official that was paid for by some group, or an elected official who can't pay for that, wants a response program and wants us to take money from the budget to do it? Is that where you want the energy of the committee? But more importantly, beyond the energy of the committee, it's the resources of our staff, clearly with such limited staff and also with a budget that barely covers. Keep in mind, I would say about 90% of the funding dollars for Fair TV, for content, go to the primary schedule. You know, a very small sliver go to the secondary events during the year. We'd love to do more, but that's where we are today in terms of budget. So to have this bright line does not exclude elected officials from partaking in the normal course of their duties from all sorts of activities. In other words, if there's a public event and we're covering it, and you're invited as a public official, the president on down, is there and speaking, of course they're going to speak. If there's a tree lighting and you're there to welcome the crowd, of course, as part of your duties, you'll be there. If the League of Women Voters does an event that is deemed by the committee as part of this penumbra of secondary events we can cover, and you're invited, you'll be on. But what we believe would bog down a future commission would be an open-ended invitation for elected officials in one way or in the other, whether they produce their own programming, whether they were somehow hosting a show, whether they somehow found themselves as a guest on another show, as the primary guest, and then hand that over to us. And now we're forced to first decide, is this partisan, is it appropriate, and then deal with those requests for other folks who may not be able to pay for production but believe in fairness. We should then find the dollars to pay for their show, and then others, and then others. So from a matter of what is a valuable service, and also from a point of view of what is the appropriate use of Fair TV's resources, it was clear to us that this kind of bright line, we thought, was at least the position to take. Now, what will happen with the RTM, we'll see where they stand. Now, it is worth noting that that bright line has raised a red flag, at least in the case of one attorney who has expressed this opinion to the RTM about wherein lies the legal authority to set standards for the channels. Again, I'm not surprised by this because there's confusion about what exactly, you often hear the term community access as sort of an umbrella for these kinds of channels. But in fact, public access channels, as I explained at the beginning of that boring little read I did, if anyone stayed with me, didn't fall asleep, public access channels are the YouTube of the 8-track age. They let anybody go on, and they should. But government access channels have their authority under law, and education access channels have their authority under law, as I'll just talk about a little bit here, to set broadcast standards. And let's talk about the federal authority for Fair TV. The Cable Communications Policy Act of 1984 is the federal law that broadly governs entities like Fair TV in the United States. The act is codified at 47 U.S. Code 531, states, I quote, "Cable channels for the public education and government use," in subsection B, and this is the following for regarding standards and authorities. A franchising authority may, in its request for proposals as a part of a franchise, and may require as part of a cable operator's proposal for a franchise renewal, subject to Section 546 of this title, that the channel capacity be designated for public educational and governmental use, and the channel capacity on institutional networks be designated for educational or governmental use. And here's where I bolded it. And may require rules and procedures for the use of the channel capacity designated pursuant to this section. In other words, the federal law clearly states that there is an authority for those who govern it. The franchisee in this case is Cablevision, or I should say the franchisee is the state of Connecticut in this case, which gave that authority to Cablevision, which then lost it to Soundview, and now it has been handed to Fair TV as well. I'll show you from the further record that authority lies right in federal law, right in federal statute. Now, at the state level, the franchising authority, as I just mentioned, as it pertains to Fair TV, is the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut, PURA / formerly DPUC, is the entity that decides, Cablevision of Southern Connecticut, you're in charge of cable area 2, and you have the responsibility of providing PEG access services. But the franchising authority, as I said, is the state of Connecticut, and the state, under PA 08-159, an act concerning the third-party nonprofit community access providers and community antenna television companies, enacted June 12, 2008, invested any municipality in a cable service area that qualified, Cable Area 2, to which Fairfield belongs, with the authority to operate the education and government access channels serving its residents, if the municipality requested that authority. The town of Fairfield requested and received that authority in August of 2008. The letter was authored by the town's law department and signed by the chairman of the Fair TV committee, who at the time was Neil Fink. I was the vice chairman. That letter was penned by Eileen Kennelly for us, and it clearly asked for that authority from Soundview, and it was granted, and there was a letter on file from Soundview granting that authority. Finally, the regional and local authority for Fair TV and the town of Fairfield, essentially, because Fair TV in the end is just the arm of or is essentially the entity for the town of Fairfield to set broadcast standards. Our authority lies locally, the regional entity designated by PA 108-159 to serve as that's the legislation that created Fair TV, to the entity, the regional entity that serves as the distributor of funds to municipal entities that requested the authority to operate education and government access channels. That's the Cable Advisory Council of Area 2. You remember in the beginning we talked about that? That entity, which now distributes $100,000 to 4 municipalities of the 6 that have asked and received the authority to run their education and government channels, the Cable Advisory Council of Area 2 required that any applicant for funding, quote, develop policies and procedures for their operation, unquote. The Fair TV committee submitted a draft version of policies and procedures in order to qualify to take part in the CAC2 grant award process. The ordinance language presented to the RTM that we're now in discussions with sponsors, et cetera, would supersede those draft policies and be submitted as part of the package of qualifying documents for the next available grant cycle. The Connecticut Department of Public Utility Control reviewed and approved these requirements. So in other words, in order for Fair TV to get any grant money from the CAC2, they have to have authority to run their operations. They have to be able to set standards, what can and can't be on. So that's regional authority. So now you have federal, you have state, and you have regional rationale for why we have this authority. Finally, the Fair TV Operational Committee, an ad hoc committee of the Board of Selectmen, was charged and reconstituted at the November 14, 2012 meeting of the BOS. And it was directed by the BOS to craft language for an ordinance for a permanent Fair TV commission as part of its duties, as noted in the minutes, that, quote, the committee should provide recommendations for the future of Fair TV. So clearly, there is an authority here. It is absolutely clear from the legislative record above that the town of Fairfield has the authority to set policies and procedures that govern education and government access channels through its Fair TV operational committee and/or a successor commission. Such authority, not just available to Fairfield, but wielded by municipalities across the nation for decades, as any quick Google search would show, allows them to set broadcast standards, i.e. decide what the scope of content will be, including who and what can appear on these channels. And let me just put this, not in my own words, but in the words of the nonprofit Government Access Television Institute's guidebook, which is used all over this country in the setting up and maintaining of government and education access channels. In its very first chapter, the GATA guidebook spells out what this means. Quote, unlike public channels, government channels are granted editorial rights to choose the content, format, and subject of information broadcasted to the public. Under the section entitled Editorial Control, the guidebook states, quote, a government access channel is not a public access channel. Why I bored you with the difference between public, government, and educational access. People do not have a First Amendment rights to appear on a government channel, just as none of us can submit a show to NBC and expect it to air in prime time. The same is true of government access channels.
Mr. Kennelly?
I'm almost done.
Okay,
We're-
we've got a couple of attorneys waiting for our next.
I
meeting,
hear about
and
the attorneys, but I
apologize.
sat through stump grinding, so if I could, I'd just like to finish up. And I
Yeah.
did,
Yeah, just-
then my schedule to be here today.
Yeah,
We're
no,
almost
I
done.
appreciate
I
that. It
appreciate,
just
and I
went on-
appreciate your indulgence.
It just went on considerably longer than what we had.
Okay,
initially
sure,
talked about.
we're almost through, just 2 pages more. There have been questions raised, most recently at a meeting I couldn't attend, and I felt quite badly because when I went back and looked at the tape, I saw that you had those questions, Selectwoman McCarthy-Vahey, about past practices, so I thought I'd address that if I could. Why not simply just look at the past practices of other providers of education and government access television, community access television? Why don't we just rewrite what other people have done? The state regulatory oversight has been poor. The clearest example is what we've gone through, the legislation that eventually had to create Fair TV. The environment in 2009 and today is vastly different than the 1980s, when most E&G systems were being developed. Today, individuals who are in government have accessed low-cost opportunities, and the internet is a baseline to begin in terms of being able to provide connections to constituents and the public. Clearly today, the government and education access channels are not that. You don't use the standards for WABC TV in 1982 for Netflix. Yes, both do appear on your television, but both are very different entities. And that analogy is to make you understand that the government access channel in 1983 or 85 or 87 or 92 or whenever is very different than what Fair TV is. Tomorrow, if Cablevision, there's all sorts of litigation and all the rest about what's going on, if Cablevision were to go away, today, Fair TV could continue to exist in cyberspace, both recorded and live. We have live stream channels available to us to provide broadcast. At the end of the day, the choice really becomes whether or not Fair TV is going to be access to broadcast by elected officials, or is it going to provide access for the public to local government? And that's going to be the RTM to decide. I would say finally that Fair TV operations have been underwritten by town taxpayers. Now more than ever, in these difficult times, a higher standard is demanded here. Simply saying what other communities did isn't enough. Quality, dependable meeting coverage versus nice but unneeded infomercial-style programming clearly shows that when that choice is before us, that the appropriate choice in the path of taxpayers is the meeting coverage primarily, and things that really the taxpayer feels is worth their dollar. And with that, I'll take any questions, and if not, excuse myself so lawyers can join you for executive session.
Do you have any questions?
Not at this time. I think this was very thorough and I think did answer some of the questions that were raised the last time, as you mentioned, so I don't.
All right. Mr. Kennelly, thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Nick? You did.
That's a
And Kevin's not here either.
slow timing issue.
Do we want to, the next, excuse me, folks, I apologize, but we do have a few other items to get to, so if you could ask just to, in terms of the Mill Hill Roof Building Committee charge, given Kevin's not here, and given Tom wasn't able to stay, do we want to take that on now or do that in 2 weeks?
Is there any timing concern with that, just looking at,
In terms of the charge itself, no.
we don't have we're not appointing a committee.
We're not appointing a committee yet. That would
Today,
still have to
so-
happen. Because it's a roof committee, there are some different options we have from using the Special Projects Building Committee or the TFC or potentially one of the existing committees we have. So it may not
Right.
be, and I
And
think all
this-
those options we should discuss. I'd feel more comfortable with Kevin here to do that.
I would as well. It seems the charge itself is just a Board of Selectmen item, and so it makes sense.
So if we can have a motion to postpone then
So moved.
to a date certain, which would be our next meeting. I'll second that. Any further discussion on that?
No.
All right, so are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we're postponing to a date certain the Mill Hill Roof Building Committee charge. And that date certain being our next Board of Selectmen meeting. Next up, to consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector and the amount recommended. I have a motion to accept,
So moved.
and I'll second that. Any further discussion?
Yes, I'd like to amend that to add at the end, replace the period with a comma and add the amount $13,569.68.
All right, I'll second that. Any further discussion on the amendment?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion stands before us as amended. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that's done. To hear, consider, and act upon any communications, there are none before us. To hear, consider, and act upon any other business that shall properly come before this meeting, there's none before us. Next up is the town attorney for a private executive session concerning pending litigation. I have a motion to go into private executive session,
So moved.
and a second here. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We'll now need to ask you.
And then you'll.
May I have a motion to come back into public session?
So moved.
I'll second. I just want to confirm that there were no motions made and no votes taken in private session. Are we ready to vote on the motion to come back in? All in favor?
Yes. Aye.
And then may I have a motion to accept the attorney's recommendation?
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Then lastly, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're done. Jerry, thank you.
You're welcome.